Have my mic muted. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to BRAP. Great to be back. Actually, I did a podcast earlier today. Let me forgot this. Oh, there we go. I did a podcast earlier today. Just quick rant. It was about the $100 the rumor going around with GTA 6 potentially. This is all speculation, by the way. Potentially $100. Now, I did a rant about that because there was some interesting dialogue around a price increase for AAA games, more specifically at the $100 price point. So definitely check that video out. But I want to give a big shout out to everyone in the live chat. I see Nate. What's going on, Nate? Great to see you in the live chat. AC says, what up? What's up, AC? And Game Logic will be joining me here in just a second. So I'm just going to lean back here and relax, just hang out here a little bit until Game Logic arrives. Move up my chair here, get comfortable. But look, big weekend this weekend. And I say big weekend because my Washington Commanders play in the NFC Championship game. Who would have thought that? The Commanders, the 4-13 Commanders in 2024. Oh, my mic's popping a little bit. Is it still popping? Hold on a sec here. I might have to adjust my mic settings. Let me see. How was that? Is my mic better now? If you guys give me a quick mic check. Let me see something here real quick. All right, is it still popping? Still doing it, huh? Corey Neogen says my mic is good. What about you, Nate? I don't know if you can hear me okay, Nate. Good now. Okay. Yeah, I turned it down a little bit. Hold on just a second. All right. Sorry about that. I think I had my mic cranked up a little bit too high. Turn me up. But yeah, the Commanders, great season, AC. I mean, look. 4-13 last year. 4-13. We draft Jaden Daniels. Well, one, we hire a competent coach, front office, and we draft Jaden Daniels, and the rest, as they say, is history. Because, I mean, who would have thought that the Commanders would be here in this place right now? I mean, I certainly didn't. I mean, I didn't think we'd go 4-13 again this year. I thought that we probably would go 6-11, maybe like a 2-game improvement, right? But we went 12-5 in the regular season and beat the Detroit Lions. Now, granted, the Lions, their defense has been decimated with injuries. But, I mean, look, they still have that high-power offense, and we stopped them. So, I don't want to get Game Logic in here real quick. Give me a second here. All right, got Game Logic here. What's going on, Logic?
How's my friend? Did you already intro us up and everything?
I was just ranting about the Commanders, how great they are. So, that's pretty much it.
Why don't you take us back to pre-roll, man, and do the whole intro music and everything?
We could certainly do that. Do the countdown.
Yeah.
Let's do it. All right, we're going to kick off the show again right now. All right. Officially welcome to BRAP now.
Hey. Yes, thank you. Hey, welcome aboard, everybody. My name is Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going Weekly Games podcast. But tonight, I'm here to guest host on the Basement Radio Arcade podcast. for Friday, the 24th of January, 2025. Here with me, as usual, I have my stalwart partner in crime, Mr. BRAP. How you doing, BRAP?
Doing well, Logic. Just like I said, I was ranting about Jaden Daniels. It's a big weekend this weekend for Commanders fans. So
yeah, I'm sorry, I don't keep up with the football. Who are you guys playing?
We're playing the Eagles.
Okay, having defeated the Lions last week, right?
That is correct. Yeah, we beat the Lions last week. We actually beat the Eagles. We split the series a game apiece. We played them twice. Won once. We lost once. So it's gonna be a tough game. It's gonna be a good game.
Man, if Forte shows up tonight, he's gonna be a little salty. I guess I hadn't really prepared for that.
You do remember last week? I might add, I accurately predicted that the Commanders would beat the Detroit Lions. Now, I didn't think that we'd open up a can of whoop ass on them the way we did, but we won. If
I remember correctly, he was talking mad smack too.
I think so. I believe he was. I believe he was.
All right. Well, we have a chock full show. I have probably overstuffed the agenda, so we'll see how much of it we get through. We're going to kick off with segment 1, talking about the games we've been playing. Then we're going to talk about a little bit of actual news. Then we're going to talk about. Then we're going to move on to segment 3, a section that I call the week's foolishness and the week's Chivos. So we'll talk about some highs and lows in the industry, some of the foolishness that's been going around the YouTube content creator circuit, talking about things that are not necessarily news. And then we'll talk about the significant new releases coming out next week. So without much further ado, let's get to it. Starting with segment 1, let's talk about the games that we've been playing. BRAP, what have you been playing? Because I actually haven't talked to you a lot this week. So I'm actually not sure what you're up to game-wise.
You know, I actually didn't get... Actually, I played a little bit of Metaphor ReFantazio. I'm still playing that. The issue is that I've been so busy. I just haven't had time to play as much as I want. Although I did download Ninja Gaiden 2, the remaster that was stealth dropped or into Game Pass. So well, not really stealth drop. I mean, they announced it at the developer direct, but I did download that. Now, I will tell people, if you're interested in Ninja Gaiden and you don't like hard games, you probably shouldn't play this game. Ninja Gaiden games aren't necessarily easy. They are brutal. They can be brutal. And they can have wonky camera angles, which really don't make things that much easier either. So, but yeah, so that is on my to-do list this weekend. I did download it, so I'll be playing that. But I got like a few hours of Metaphor in because I'm still chipping away at that game. I really don't want to. The only reason I'm going to Gaiden is because I'm a big Gaiden fan. I mean, I remember Ninja Gaiden on the NES was one of the first games that I can remember that kind of introduced a cinematic cutscene. The opening cutscene, as a matter of fact, of Ryu Hayabusa's dad fighting, I forget who it was in the beginning of that cutscene. And I'll never forget the time watching that cutscene on the NES, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like I never forget. It was like me and a bunch of my friends. You probably remember Logic when we used to game. We often would game with our friends, and we'd all take turns handing the controller back and forth. And I just remember, like, we're all in awe of just watching Ninja Gaiden, that opening sequence, that cutscene, and that's probably the first cinematic cutscene that I remember. That goes back to the NES days. And actually, I did play Gaiden on the Nintendo Switch, because you have the NES, whatever it's called, on the Nintendo Switch, and Gaiden's up there. So I got to play Ninja Gaiden a little bit a couple weeks ago on the Switch. So that's the only reason I really. With Metaphor, I don't want to stop playing or go to something else, because I did that with Indiana Jones, and I was like, okay, I'm going down the rabbit hole with Indiana. I don't want to do that just yet. I really want to go back to Metaphor ReFantazio, beat that. But again, love Gaiden, and I'll talk more about Gaiden later. So I did download it. That's probably going to be on the agenda this weekend. I'll put it like maybe 2 or 3 hours into it, but then get back to Metaphor again when I have time. So.
That's really cool. Yeah, I definitely want to go kind of down the tail of the tape on the Ninja Gaiden dual announcement that happened on Thursday when we talk about the showcase, or the developer direct in this case. That game also available on the PlayStation Store, by the way. Shadow dropped on both consoles same day. For me, I haven't been playing too much variants of anything. I've made the transition to where I'm just a live gamer now. Um, and I went back and I tried. The Division 2 is one of my favorite games. Slow Mo and I both spent a lot of time in that game. I think he spent more time than me. I've put maybe 75 hours or so into the game, doing a couple runs, and then also working through part of the expansion pack. And I tweeted, or whatever the equivalent is that we call it on Blue Sky, earlier this week that I apparently at the tail end of last year, I don't even remember doing this, but I made some list of games that I think is supposed to be the 60 or 61 games that I never have any hesitation to go back and do a rerun through. And the Division 2 was on that list, and so I went back and decided to try the Division 2, and I played about an hour. And right about the 1 hour mark, I had this kind of twinge like go on. I'm like, what is this? Like, what am I feeling right now? And it was that, yeah, I'm having fun playing this game, but there's no tears. Like, all these guys are just little AI. They're just little shell scripts of software running around executing a pre-canned set of responses and actions. And I was like, no, I think I need to be, smacking the cheeks of somebody who's not having a good round on Call of Duty, because even though I'm not tied into the chat, I still know that they're salty right, when they don't do well. So I put the Division 2 down, and then I popped back over to Black Ops 6. I mean, it's just, and I think I've been struggling and going back and forth with this right over. I mean, since 2019, I've gone through different phases of this. The year that I struck out and spent like about a year in Star Citizen and with the Star Citizen community, and I've come back to single player games and I'm back to the live service games, and like I said, I've gone through different phases of where I felt bad about playing each type for different reasons. And I think I'm just turning the corner now to where I'm just in this mode, at least now, that I just want to play either live service games or games that are kind of like Cyberpunk 2077 or other games where just there's been, or No Man's Sky, where like there's just been a robust delivery of content, right? And there's tons of replay value. And I think that's just where I am right now. So, I mean, like I said, I toe dipped into the Division 2 this week. I've really been playing Black Ops 6. We're in the last waning days of Season 1. I've had it on my list to get back over to Fallout 76, although I haven't gotten over there to play more of that yet. So I understand that some will see that as a shortcoming. I see that as a shortfall myself too, but I've also spent several decades playing single player games, contributing a lot of money to the industry. So, it's time to leave me alone and let me do what I want to do. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start talking about the news. So the first news story in our rundown, this news story over on Kit Guru, by Mustafa Mahmood. Don't Nods Lost Records gets new details and release date. Making the announcement via press release, the team at Don't Nod officially shared all the necessary launch details for Lost Records, Bloom, and Rage, saying Lost Records, Bloom, and Rage will be priced at $39.99 upon release, including both parts of the game, Bloom and Rage, which add up to roughly 10 to 12 hours of gameplay. As was previously announced, the first part of the game will launch on the 18th of February. That said, players will have to wait a bit longer for part 2, with the team sharing that to optimize experience for players and enhance the storytelling for a truly immersive continuation of the journey, the release of Tape 2 Rage has slightly been pushed back to April 15th, 2025. So if we remember the tale of the tape of Don't Nod, they gave up the IP for Life is Strange. I think sold it over to another studio, which I think has been in the news cycle for having a toxic environment and some racist developers like sneaker netting in racist content or whatever. So that series is off doing its own thing, and then I think also struggled not quite making the numbers that they needed to make with the last release, even though the last release was pretty well critically acclaimed as like one of the highlights of the Life is Strange series, kind of returning back to form. But Don't Nod continues trying to forge their way ahead with new IP. This Bloom and Rage is a is a dual pack game. I don't know how else to describe it, but I'm in my mind it's along the lines of what was the Pokemon game that's like two different things, and they wanted you to buy both in order to access all the content.
Was it like Pokemon Fire and Ice or something? Or did I make that up?
I'm not sure. I'm not a Pokemon expert. I thought it was like two different colors, but I can't remember. But at any rate,
it was. Yeah, it was something like that.
But at any rate, this is, Don't Nod is still kind of a darling studio, right, amongst people who are big on the indie scene, or games that are kind of right on the cusp somewhere between indie and AA. So it's good to hear that they're still going at it. It's good in this current fiscal environment to hear that they're not shut down. And it's good that despite experiencing some challenges, they're getting their game out, although they have to stagger release it. What do you think about? I mean, so if you think about this game as kind of along the lines of the scope and scale of a Life is Strange title, what do you think about the $39.99 price point?
Actually, I don't. I think that's a good price point. I mean, if it's similar in scope and scale as Life is Strange, I mean that's not a bad price point. I think that's fair. I think it's fair. I'm not going to sit there and say this is a Game Pass game. I know some people will, but or that should be in a subscription service. But yeah, no, my issue, as I said this earlier, is that my time is limited these days. And like I really enjoyed Life is Strange. And I remember seeing Lost Records. I'm like, okay, this looks interesting. I want to say I'd like to get to this game, but I probably won't. But 10 to 12 hours of gameplay for $40. It's not bad at all.
Yeah. Yep. This game coming to PlayStation 5, PC, and Xbox Series X and S. It is not mentioned in this article, so I assume that it is not going to Game Pass, at least not right at launch.
Yeah, probably not at launch. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, this is probably not a game that I'm gonna get around to. I've never got. I mean, I've always been Life is Strange curious, right? But I've just never packed it into my schedule. Between the types of games that I've been interested in playing. But it's one of those things, and we're going to talk about this a lot. Like when we talk about the developer direct, right? There are of the games that were shown, there are games that I like and I think are headed in a good artistic direction. But I won't personally play. But I'm happy that they're there, right, for the market and for the art and for the people who do want that type of thing. Yeah, which is yeah, go ahead.
Yes, that's a great point, Logic. I mean, you talk about the art of video games. I mean, and I think of Dontnod. I think of when I played Life is Strange. I mean, it was such kind of like, and I remember playing. It was kind of a breath of fresh air for me because it was an escape from you mentioned live service games. I was playing more live service games than I do now at the time, and also more AAA games as I typically do even today. But it was such a different type of game. Artistically speaking, it was different. It wasn't a big budget blockbuster title, and it was such a good game. Like the narrative, the dialogue, the story, everything about it. It kind of had this sci-fi is not the right word I'm looking for.
Like a was it Northern Exposure?
Yeah, something. Yeah. That probably. Yeah, kind of like the North. Yeah, exactly. I don't know what. Yeah, that's actually perfect. Yeah, it was just like Northern Exposure. Yeah, it was. And so that regard, I don't think I've ever. I can't recall playing a game like that. So it was a very unique experience for me. It was actually a great experience. One of my favorite games at the time when I played it.
And like, and most importantly, it's an okay way. That's an okay way to be as a gamer. Like it's okay to have artistic appreciation and market appreciation for a different style of content that you want, right? But to be happy that it's there for other gamers. You don't have to hate on it just because it's not what you want or it's not what you want to play, or it's not on your preferred platform. Again, I don't know why every game has to be like a poker chip. Anyway, moving on to the next story, number 2 in the rundown. PlayStation 6 chip design is nearing completion as Sony and AMD partnership forges ahead. The story over on TechSpot by Alfonso Maruccia. AMD Zen 6 and 3D V-Cache could power the next generation of PlayStation. Sony is currently trying to convince gamers that the modest improvements of the PlayStation 5 Pro can justify its hefty $700 price tag, and the console is reportedly performing well in the market. Meanwhile, the Japanese giant is also hard at work on the next generation of PlayStation hardware, with AMD confirmed as the key partner for designing the system on a chip at the heart of the upcoming gaming machine. Well-known tipster Kepler2 previously reported that Sony and AMD were working on 2 different PS6 SoCs. Now, the same leaker has provided additional details about the progress of the SoC, revealing that the chip design is complete and has already entered the pre-silicon validation phase. According to Kepler2, the A0 tape-out is scheduled for later this year, which suggests the new console could arrive on the market earlier than anticipated. So the article goes on to talk about just kind of what the normal timeline is between taping out of the SoC and then starting to design the hardware enclosure and the cooling system and the things around it, and the time to actually getting it to market. And so there's a theory that this could arrive in 2027. And my personal feel, as we've talked about on this show, is the last couple of generations we've seen a 7-year life cycle between like the one console to the next premier console kind of taking over. I have personally foreseen no reason for that to change this generation. There's some people are of the opinion, and I think Forte was of the opinion that because of the pandemic and supply shortages and like the generation not really ramping up and taking off and et cetera, that they would hold these consoles on the market for another year. I don't personally believe that. Look, the march of technology goes on. People are crunching down on CPU lithography processes, and we've seen a reduction, right? 3 nanometers, 2 nanometers. TSMC raising the prices for like their more optimal nodes. People who are consumers of these raw materials and components for their systems, the people making them aren't standing still, and it at a certain point it doesn't make fiscal sense for the people who are the downstream consumers of those suppliers' components to stand still either. I have largely theorized that in some ways this generation is going to be a lost generation, just in terms of the total amount of content that has been delivered on the console side, because both at PlayStation and Xbox, there have been slowdowns and bog downs in production pipeline, admittedly at different like phases of the generation. But and then what my belief is, long term, we are not going to see the total uptake of consoles, even on PlayStation, that we have the previous generations. I could be wrong on that, but that's just my projection. And so you're going to have this kind of bathtub effect, right, in this generation with people who didn't upgrade. And as we're starting to get into the back half of the generation, you're going to see people just stalling, right, and deciding to wait, right, for the PlayStation 6. So, but I don't think that, and so you're going to have this push pull between supplier and market where there's not really economically, there's not really anything to be done to heat up the uptake of PlayStation 5, I don't think, in the last 2 years of the generation. And you're just going to get to a point where it makes sense, right, for PlayStation to move on, and it's going to make sense for Xbox from a competitive perspective to also move on to the next console. So I think we're still on the same 7-year life cycle that we've always been. BRAP, what are your thoughts, hopes, and dreams for the notion that 3D V-Cache could show up on the PlayStation 6?
So I'm not as familiar. I was going to ask you your thoughts on 3D V-Cache. I'm not as familiar with it. My high level understanding of it is that it basically speeds things up on the CPU side. So obviously there'd be benefit there for gaming, right? But I guess my question is this something that, and I did get a chance to read the article. Is this something that Cerny has? Because I believe that the AMD CPUs already have 3D V-Cache, but is this something that Cerny is involved in, or
yeah, I mean,
part of AMD trying to figure out like how are we going to incorporate this into our PlayStation 6? Is that something do you know if he's involved in that?
I assume so, right? We haven't heard any news to the otherwise, and since he was anointed, right, and granted the scepter for the the PlayStation 4 generation, I believe he's continuing to carry the torch, right, into the PlayStation 6 generation. And we've heard right from those past histories that he's always had this pattern of like going around and talking to developers and and trying to sell them and pitch them and market them on some of the concepts he's thinking, but also doing requirements elicitation and taking on board from them what it is that they want and they need for the upcoming generation of hardware, and weaving that into his plans. So AMD does do chips with 3D V-Cache, but it is not their, in my mind, it is still not their mainline product, and it is still up until Zen 5, right, until this recent launch in fall of 2024, we have not seen it arrive at the same time. So typically the rollout has been the I would call them the mainline X chips. So if you go so on desktop, we've had Ryzen 1000, 2000, 3000, 5000, and 7000, right? And so across those generations, typically what you get is a 7600X, a 7700X, a 7800X, right? At the low end, there will typically be a 7600 non-X variant, and that's kind of like your mainline rollout, and that's typically what launches at the beginning of the generation. And then, I don't know, somewhere like 6 months-ish later, or up to a year later, they start then seeding in these 3D V-Cache SKUs, which will be your X3D SKUs. So then you will get a 7950 X3D, a 7900 X3D, a 7800 X3D. I can't remember if they've ever done a 7700 or an X700 X3D. I think they did one generation, but basically you get not necessarily a change in architecture, but you get a bolt on, right, of this 3D V-Cache, and really what 3D V-Cache the 3D V-Cache is it's a marketing term, but not solely a marketing, but it's a marketing term that is oriented around where they're placing the cache on the SoC. In previous generation, they placed it. I can't remember what they've done, but they flipped it. I think they placed it underneath the primary SoC before, and then
now it's stacked, right?
And this time they're putting on top. Well, it's always been stacked, but one time it was underneath, and now it's on top.
Okay.
But really, at the end of the day, when we say 3D V-Cache, we just mean it's just more cache, right? There's nothing special about the fact that it's 3D. The 3D V-Cache part of it is a matter of like controlling TDP, thermals, right? Cool, right? That type of, and limiting the total travel distance, right, of signals that have to go across those traces, right? At the end of the day, it's
I'm sorry, you say it's better. You say something about thermal, so it's better for preventing overheating.
Yes, for making temperatures controllable and applying
better efficiency. Right. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. What cache does, and I think this is a super simple description, is it allows the loading in of pre-processed data that may need to be rapidly fetched, right? For the jobs that the CPUs for jobs that compute is doing, right? In terms of that could be for floating point calculations, for data that it needs in the rendering pipeline, etc. And then there are different types of cache, right? L1, L2, L3. I think L3 cache is the one that's most beneficial to gaming performance. And at the end of the day, what it's really doing is it's an accelerant to total and overall instructions per second that the chip can execute. So that all being said, 3D V-Cache as of late has become these X3D chips have become like the bee's knees of the industry. It's taking off on the games. Every time these things come out, they are the top performing gaming chips for PC. And in particular this time, because Intel's Ultra 200 series has been such a dud in the gaming space, the 9800 X3D is just tearing the market apart. It's constantly out of stock because basically no one's buying the Intel part. So this is a relatively exciting time to talk about this technology being moved over and applied to the console, because up till now it's been solely reserved for the gaming space. And I would think that part of that would be because now you're going to experience the challenge of trying to wrench this thing into a console enclosure, and you're going to increase your overall cooling design challenge, right, that you have to surmount. These chips do run hot. They are a primary reason why for building PCs. I do not build PCs anymore with anything less than a 360 millimeter AIO. So I've got one machine over here that's on a 240. That is the last freaking one that I put a 240 millimeter AIO in the box. Like these things, I apply a 360 millimeter AIO, and I've got various boxes that where I'm using a lot of muscle to keep the thing below 70 degrees. And then I still get spikes sometimes, so I'm running in the high 60s, which is just where I want to be when I'm doing intense gaming. I have some that will still trip over that and get into the 70s, which for me, because I'm super OCD about temperatures, right, is just, it bothers the heck out of me, because before the X3D chips, when I was air cooling, I wouldn't have those problems. So this is going to be a significant hardware design challenge for the PlayStation team to surmount, but it's super exciting in terms of the potential of total compute that could be delivered.
Yeah, as you're talking about this, Logic, I'm thinking this probably comes in handy with like I think of like games that like open world games that are a little more demanding. So I look at this as maybe like helping with that, right? Like,
well, if this were on an Xbox, then Todd Howard would have more space to hold all his memory for his 1,000 sandwiches that are still moving around on the other side of the universe.
that's probably yeah. No, I just think it's it's because I obviously, like we talk about Unreal Engine 5, right? That become, and I feel like as engines and games become more demanding, this is something that could potentially address that, right? You mentioned like the ability to access data quickly, just optimization. Those things come to mind, just that this could help with more of those demanding games, maybe more of those open world games that we might see next gen or next on the PlayStation 6.
Well, and a key component on PC gaming, right, is PC gaming has the benefit of having dual buckets of memory, right? You have VRAM, but then you also have system memory. And this is sometimes why you see the system memory requirements high, because in a lot of cases, part of the problem for coding these games is that some things have to be parallelized, right? You can't just have them executed on a single string. You also need them executing somewhere else. And sometimes that's pre-processing, right? To get through a lot of the workflows that have to be done in the rendering pipeline, kind of in advance of the next thing coming up, while one subsystem of the machine is doing that work right now, right? So there's a lot of pre-processing so that it can hand off, right, and have that stuff ready to go for the next upcoming clock cycle, right, in the rendering pipeline. And when I say things like that, you're talking about things that are happening at like the millisecond, right, order of magnitude. One of the things that V-Cache can help with is it can help with, again, loading a lot of the pre-processing that needs to be done to help with parallelization. That is one of the key challenges, in particular, that we've seen this generation of games, right, since this console generation launched, and it's been hurting right on the PC side as well. And it's one of the reasons why you've seen all the consternation about like total memory that's available even on the PC side, and talks of like NVIDIA being stingy with VRAM, and then again, developers not having enough room to parallelize workloads, and how that's sometimes not as much of a challenge on the PC side, but on the consoles, then they have to do tricks and works around. So at the end of the day, right, it's more flops, more IPS, more frames.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next news story. This news story over on Rock Paper Shotgun, by Edwin Evans Thurwell. Palworld's creators are paying the Kenzera devs to make a horror game about the entertainment industry. Here's your feel-good story for the weekend, possibly. The creators of mega hit Palworld are using some of their PAL bucks to set up a new publishing arm. And their first project as publisher is an untitled horror game from Surgent Studios, the struggling developers of Tales of Kenzera Zal. Intriguingly, this doesn't appear to be the Project USO Surgent revealed last October, which founder Abubakar Salim described as both a reflection on the experience of fatherhood and a cross between an RPG and a beat-em-up power fantasy. According to Salim, that game was set in the same world as the studio's debut Afrofuturist platformer. Their new game for Pocketpair isn't. Instead, it's being positioned as a game about the entertainment industry. So look, at this point, I will take back any disparaging comments I've had about Palworld, about it being overblown, about it not nearly being the big hit on the market that people claim that it is. Look, whatever is going on, with I don't know, whether I think your success is credible or not, or I think it's going to be long lasting or not, this type of action, right? This industry generosity that you're showing by, taking your success and kind of paying it forward, and helping to prop up other developers. This is the exact kind of thing that I talk about that sometimes I feel like is a problem, from the content creator side, where rather than focus on building games up and raising games up, right, there's this constant focus to tear things down or to raise things up that aren't really meritocratic, in my opinion. But this is an example of a developer having become successful, right, in sharing that wealth out. So I'm all for it. I don't know, BRAP, what are your thoughts?
I think you said it was a feel good story at first. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's the article quote. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't disagree. It is a feel good story. It is the developer, like you said, taking the success they've had with Power World and paying another developer to make a horror game about the entertainment industry. I think it's great. It's funny as you talk about the art form, and I keep going back to the first article we discussed, Don't Nod's game, and now this game, and now we're talking about Power World, working with or paying Kenzera, and then you're talking about people tearing down games they don't like. It's unfortunate that happens. It tends to happen quite a bit. And it's interesting. I just don't think we celebrate gaming enough, to be honest with you. Like, even though this isn't a game that I would be interested in, the Kenzera game, it's still cool that it's being done. It's cool that that the Power World creators are looking to reinvest in the industry, and bring another game. These things should be celebrated. I feel like the conversation is always, oh, that person is bald headed. Like it's so stupid. And I had this thought. I was thinking about, because I did a BRAP rant earlier today about $100 games. There's that rumor going around about GTA 6, but I was thinking, like, outside of $100 games or AAA games, there's so many other games that are out right now that we just don't talk about. I think we went over last week with David Jaffe. We talked about the was it GDC, or is it the Dice Awards, the nominees?
Yeah, we talked about the Dice Awards.
Yeah, and there was just so many different games that were being celebrated, recognized, I should say, not acknowledged, but recognized by the industry. The industry, people in the industry, and that just doesn't get talked about enough. So let me grab the super chat real quick here. Logic, Warwana, $2 super chat says, hit that like button, but also Dev Direct was 10 out of 10. So thank you, Warwana.
We're gonna fight Warwana, but we'll wait till we get to that part of the show.
I give it a 12 out of 10, but go ahead. I'm joking. I didn't give it
12. Next news story over on VG247. Dragon Age. By the way, in the chat, if my mic is too loud or whatever, by all means, let me know. This news story, like I said, over on VG247 by Mark Warren. Dragon Age: The Veilguard's latest patch sounds like it could be the game's last big update, as BioWare says Dareth Shiral. Dragon Age: The Veilguard's latest patch sounds like it could be the game's last major update based on the wording BioWare used in the notes for it. This latest one is the 5th post-release patch that Veilguard has gotten since it came out at the end of October last year. And while they've mostly been about the kind of bug fixes and tweaks you'd expect, BioWare has also used these updates to add in stuff like that extra Mass Effect gear. This time, though, the message BioWare's included alongside the rundown of changes is a bit interesting. Thank you all for playing Dragon Age: The Veilguard, it wrote. We were so happy with the game's stability at launch. I hope you've enjoyed our quality of life patches since then. Now, if I remember correctly, like the way that I've been thinking the voice track for Veilguard has always been that it's of limited scope, that they aren't planning on doing DLC, that like don't have this expectation of like Baldur's Gate 3 like patches with content updates. Don't expect The Witcher 3 kind of level of support and extra side missions being added in and expansion packs coming out. So it was kind of always to me that the studio, when I talk about the studio, remember this studio is multiple teams, multiple locations, that the intent was always to hit this, right, rapidly get behind it and support it and shore it up for any shortfalls, but then to get off of it and move on to the next thing. So BRAP, does this sound, I mean, is your recollection of the voice track for this the same? And I mean, what does this cause you in terms of your hopes and dreams for where BioWare is going next?
So for me, the next thing from them and from EA is Mass Effect. That the remake, or not the remake, but the reboot, or no, I can't remember. Is it a remake or reboot? I don't remember.
I think it is
it's a reboot.
I think it's a reboot. What I don't know,
but it's like a sequel, though. I think.
Yeah, I want to say it's like that's what I was going to say. I think it's a soft reboot, and what I mean by that is,
thank you.
It's not retreading or erasing the past history. It is telling a new story with new characters.
New characters, yeah.
I'm not a guy who follows like Mass Effect, like close air support at like 300 feet off the ground, but that's what I think. I understand that I've heard.
Yeah, some of the live chat are saying it's a soft reboot. I think that's what it is. Yeah, no, to me this is like, okay, I feel like there was a lot. Obviously, there was a lot of, I think, pressure to get this game out and for this game to be good. Consider, we talked about. Did we talk about? I think with Jaffe we talked about what's it called from BioWare? What the heck was the game?
I mean, Anthem. We talked about. So the strategic purpose for this game is this was the make good game, right? This was the return to form game, right? After you've soiled the earth with Mass Effect Andromeda and your drawers, with Anthem, this was the let's restore confidence in the community, right? Because this is, BioWare is one of, like, for years it was 5. I think now it's gone up to 6. But the 5 key studios that lost everyone's faith, CD Projekt Red, Blizzard, BioWare, I don't know if there were 2, Bethesda, and then there was one other one in there. And so for a lot of these studios, there's been a matter of you need to restore faith in your fan base, because if you don't, your projections for the next thing that you're planning on doing are just start to look unrecoverable. So yeah, I mean, strategically they needed to at least stick the landing with this one. I think it's okay that maybe by some people's mark they didn't knock it out of the park, but I think it was important for them to stick the landing.
Yeah, I mean, like, even though they didn't knock it out of the park, I still look at the game, and I haven't played it, so I'm just basing this off the reviews and some of the some of the feedback that Slow-Mo's some of the things that Slow-Mo has said about the game. And he's a big Dragon Age fan, more so than I am. Clearly, I mean, this game wasn't in the same space as the original trilogy, but it seemed like there was mostly positive reviews on the game. And for BioWare, at least, considering their fall of grace, right? Anthem, Mass Effect Andromeda, that this is kind of that good rebound for them. But I don't disagree with you. This is kind of, okay, we're done with the game. We got it out. We pretty much stuck the landing on it. It's on to the next thing. The next thing is Mass Effect. I feel like there's more pressure on Mass Effect, in my opinion, than there is Dragon Age. And I say that, but I also say that as a Mass Effect fan, by the way.
I agree with that. I mean, I think it is the more industry and market significant IP.
Mm-hmm.
I think obviously there have been stalwart, Dragon Age fans, but to me, if you're going to stink up, right? If you're going to stink up the place with a wet fart, maybe you do that. Maybe that's less impactful if you do that with Dragon Age, and maybe even so, right, to a certain aspect, Anthem, because that was a new IP. But where people really got bent out of shape was you dorking up, Mass Effect.
Yeah, I mean, Andromeda was such a disappointment. I fired it up for a little bit. I was like, no, I'm good. Like, I mean, just coming off of Mass Effect 3, and just the cast of characters, the amount of, I say cast of characters, but the voice actors, Martin Sheen, for crying out loud. was in Mass Effect.
I mean, is it fair to say that there's at least a strong argument out there that some people regard Mass Effect as like the greatest RPG franchise of Western?
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah,
It is.
I'm not saying it
Yeah.
is for people in the chat who are going to flip out, or people who are like, I'm saying, I think in the circle of an intellectual Socratic argument, right, debate, that would be a plausible argument for somebody to levy, right? That Mass Effect is representative of the best Western RPG design and implementation, right, in the modern age. And I think the challenge to that would be somebody would bring up Elder Scrolls.
Oh man, two different games. Elder Scrolls in terms of scope, absolutely. Like, I mean, nobody was doing what. I mean, no one. I mean, you think of what Elder Scrolls did from just its like scope on the PC, and then bringing that to consoles too. By the way, and remember the Morrowind coming to the original Xbox was, whoa. I mean, like I on the console side, we'd never played a game like that. PC a little bit different, but consoles at least. And so that obviously had a lot of influence, impact in the console space. But I would say like Mass Effect, its narrative depth, the unique characters, the unique backgrounds of each character, different character classes, races. Like you talk about the character development. I mean, with Shepard, and
it's a space opera, right? And that to me is from a literary narrative, world building, storytelling perspective. Like I don't think that same claim can be applied to Elder Scrolls, right? Elder Scrolls sounds like it needs. Elder Scrolls to me is kind of the equivalent of an amalgamation of D&D, the amalgamation of D&D stories, right, in video games that we've gotten telling us stories about, Baldur's Gate and the Sword Coast, right? The Forgotten Realms, right? That it's a slice of a world that we know is a subcomponent of a larger world, right? But it doesn't have the same impact to me as something that you would call a space opera, and I think that's what the Mass Effect franchise, effectively pulled off.
Yeah, I think I heard you say world building too, right? I heard that correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like the world building in Mass Effect was, I mean, I can't recall anything like that. Like for me, like all the years of playing video games, I can't recall how like detailed and how rich the lore was in Mass Effect and the world building and everything, and it just came perfectly together.
Well,
And
I think it set the bar for the design of relationship building, right, and romance threads, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
in terms of there being like numerous ones that you could pursue, all of which could have impact to a certain extent to the story, but also more importantly, right, would be part of the input variables, right, that you were juggling, right, in terms of the choices you made, right, throughout.
Yeah, the dialogue wheels, to your point. I mean, it was so impactful, and it could go either way. Like it branched out. Like if you did this, then this happened, right? And I just don't recall playing a game up until that point that did that. And maybe there was, I'm just not recalling. But I will say that if there was, it didn't stick with me or resonate with me as much as Mass Effect did. So I think, and so going back to, BioWare's next game, and then also like one thing about Mass Effect, the cinematic presentation to tell the story. I mean, I always remember, I'll never forget the first time that Shepard meets the elusive man. And the portrayal of the elusive man, the cinematic cutscene, smoking a cigarette. He's got like the cosmos behind him. Like it set the tone for the character of the elusive man. Oh my God. I tell you, it might be one of the best games I've ever played as I talk about it more now. It really is. I mean, now Mass Effect 1 wasn't as good as 2. Mass Effect 1 there was a great foundation laid there, and 2 just took it to another level. And 2 is still my favorite of all the 3. But yeah, it might be one of the best games I've ever played, best trilogies I've ever played. So, but I think there's a lot of pressure on BioWare to really stick the landing on Mass Effect. To your point, the commercial success, not just the commercial success, but the I think, but also the because of the impact that the original trilogy had on the industry from a design perspective. And I'm not saying they're going to top that. That's probably hard to top, right? Like, what else can you do now that maybe hasn't been done? I don't know. Maybe there's something. Maybe there's a design out there that we haven't seen yet that's really going to define or change how games are made or designed in the future. But I don't know that this game's going to do that. I don't know if it even needs to do that. It just needs to be good.
Well, and Corey Bassey puts in the quote, I'm just wondering how much they improve the game since a lot of the systems will be the same. And quite frankly, Corey, I lost the thread now if you're talking about Mass Effect or Elder Scrolls, but I think it's applicable to Mass Effect. Like you're saying, I don't know that a ton of the systems need to change as much as I think the story really has to be great. Like, look, you can't get her now, but who was the lady who was working? Because remember, let's also remember a black mark on the BioWare pedigree over these last few years, and why they are needed to regain faith was also the shutdown of the Star Wars game that one of the studios was working on that Amy Hennig was writing the story for. And the reason I bring that up is because I was going to say, if you were ever, I mean, you can't now because I think she has her own studio or company that she's actually the head of now. But like, if you were ever going to try and get Amy Hennig back, like this would be like the thing you would want to get her back for. Let's go ahead and go on to the next story. This one over on, pretty sure this is Eurogamer. Yeah, this one over on Eurogamer by Matt Wales. Xbox Series X and S sales trailing behind Xbox One in US while PS5 outpaces PS4, but hardware sales down across the board. 4 years after its launch, US sales of Xbox Series X and S are trailing behind those of its predecessor Xbox One at the same point in the console's lifetime. Sales of the PlayStation 5, however, are now firmly outpacing PlayStation 4. That's according to sales data from marketing research and technology company Circana, formerly the MPD Group, in its latest monthly report. Circana executive director and games industry analyst Matt Piscatella summarized the company's findings covering U.S. games and hardware spending up to December 2024 in a lengthy post on Blue Sky. Commenting on some of the report's highlights, Piscatella wrote, through each console's first 50 months in the U.S. market, life to date, ending December 2024 for both Xbox Series X and S and PS5, PS5 lifetime unit sales are 7% of PS4's pace, while Xbox Series X and S trails Xbox One by 18%. By comparison, Piscatella noted through 38 months in the US through December 2023, PS5 led PS4 by 6%, while Xbox Series X trailed Xbox One by 13%. Now, look, I'm about to make some additional comments on top of the numbers. Again, all I'm adding is math. This news is not like I didn't make this news, right? Don't don't put this we don't talk about Bruno on me. I didn't make this bad news happen, right? It is what it is. But what these numbers indicate is that
I didn't make this news happen. Well, I mean it's a shame you have to say that because that's how people will take it. Right. But that's because the people they listen to often make up the news themselves, exactly. As you like to say, fan fiction. So
exactly. I mean, what this indicates is that the pace by which PlayStation 5 is outpacing the PlayStation 4 has accelerated, right, year over year from 2023 to 2024. They were outpacing PS4 sales by 6%. They're now outpacing them by 7%. By the same token, what it says about Xbox is that they are actually further falling behind their Xbox One sales, which was a generation when they were outsold 2-1 by the competitor, as they were only 13% behind in 2023. They are now 18% behind. And so I'll just tie this into a thing that I commonly say, right? Which admittedly is a I don't know, shame on us, shame on content creators, whatever that we feel compelled to constantly have to like defend ourselves or debunk ourselves, right? Between Xbox, the extremist spectrum of the Xbox fan community. Again, looking at these numbers and looking at the dwindling market share, right, of the console, like we don't need to be wrapped around the axle about what those people believe or what they say or like these crazy wackadoodle things that they come up with, because they are literally 9.8.5% of the market, and from these numbers appearing to get even smaller by the day. Now, I don't say that to disparage them. I say that to say the vocality of what they promulgate on Twitter and on their YouTube channels is not representative of what's going on in the market. Here are the numbers of what's going on in the market. Right, fewer and fewer people are buying the green box. More and more people are buying. What the heck is that? I don't even know what the baseline color of the PlayStation is. The white box. I'm not going to call it
the white. It's the white. Maybe it's just yeah.
So it's an interesting thing to observe, right, in the market dynamic, because that's the way these numbers should be looked at, is making an assessment of what's going on with the market dynamic, not being, not getting sand in your underwear and letting your nether bits get all irritated because you don't like what the numbers indicate.
Your nether bits, I like that. Logic. What's interesting is, well, to your point, I mean, this isn't a story we've made up. This is a story based on actual sales data, right? And the conversation isn't often around sales data. It's around fan fiction and conversations that people are having that aren't the right conversations. I mean, like this, for all the talk of the consoles are dying or hardware is not irrelevant. What is it? What was the word used?
Incidental.
That hardware is incidental. You see PlayStation now, and mind you, the console launched during a pandemic where there was serious challenges, supply chain, crazy inflationary dynamics. And we are year 5 into the generation, and there's no price drop still. And yet, all that being said, no price drop, pandemic, supply chain issues. It arguably, like, we talked about this with Jaffe last week. Less probably first party releases towards the, after year 2, I think of the console gen.
Yeah, it's
the place.
It's competitor having a much lower cost to entry for people to access content.
Yeah, I mean, the PlayStation 5 is outpacing PS4, and to your point, per the article, it's outpacing, has increased now. What was it, 7% to 8% now? So, I mean, I think that should tell you about how and I talked about this today on the BRAP rant, the free market, and how the market's reacting to the PlayStation 5 console. And so what that's telling us is that the PlayStation 5, as it stands today, is in higher demand than the PlayStation 4. And again, I think it's important to recognize, too, that the PlayStation 5, and I'm repeating myself here, launched during a pandemic, and there hasn't been a price drop. We actually had a price drop last generation on the PS4. I think it was about $100 when the PS4 Pro launched. No such price drop has taken place, by the way. And then to the Xboxes, the flip side, the Xbox Series X and S, I think what's interesting there, and I'm going to poke fun a little bit here, Logic, at some of the pundits, because I feel like it's appropriate to, because a lot of them were ripping off their shirts, as you like to say, foaming at the mouth,
waving their terrible towels,
and proclaiming victory at the start of the generation, because it made sense that the cheaper Xbox Series S coupled with the Xbox, or with Game Pass, the best deal in gaming. Johnny and his mom are going to go to Best Buy. They're going to see the PlayStation 5 at $500. They're going to see the Series S with Game Pass, and voila, Xbox is going to take over. None of that None of that stuff happened. And that goes back to the fact that consumers want what they want, right? Consumers want different things, you know? Consumers want high-end gaming experiences. Consumers are willing to pay for those things. And I feel like at the start of the generation, people were trying to pretend like those things didn't matter or weren't things that consumers valued.
Well, and to put some, I don't want to say credence or credibility, because the problem with those guys is they're just like a digital version of the National Enquirer, right? They're always putting out tabloid level, right, ridiculous theories. But what I will say is, and this is and as I say this, right, part of the rationale behind this is my cause of being so irritated when people assert that like I'm a PlayStation fan, right? I don't even own a PlayStation 5, right? Or that PlayStation is my preferred brand. Again, it's not, right? But what I acknowledge is the impact, right, it's having on the market and the dynamic that I'm seeing that from the demand signal that's being sent to the supplier, which incentivizes the supplier to have certain behaviors, right? What I will say is the business case that you just presented, right? To be quite honest, the dynamic and the outcome that we're seeing on the market does defy logic from an economic perspective, right? There's actually very good, right? You go back to 2020 and you go back to the ramp up from there to 2022-ish, right? And we saw rampantly high inflation, and it doesn't make sense, quite honestly, that a box that is $300, right? It is the same price at the time as the Nintendo Switch, right? And yes, the S has lots of problems when you compare it to a grown-up console, right? The PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. But if you isolate it and stand alone and compare it to the Nintendo Switch, quite honestly, it has more capability than the Nintendo Switch, right? The trade-off is that it's not portable. But I don't think that lack of portability, right, in terms of the segment of the market that prioritizes portability over performance, I don't think that's a complete explanation for the fact that a $300 box combined with the low cost of access of Game Pass, when a big part of your market demographic is parents going out and buying consoles to give to little Johnny, right? Because quite honestly, if it's me, I ain't buying little Johnny a freaking Xbox Series X at $500 a pop, right? Or a PlayStation 5, and then having little Johnny constantly bug me every month about some $70 game he wants. That kid is getting a $300 box and a $20 Game Pass subscription, and I'm going to put it in their room and say, okay, now don't bother me until next Christmas, right? Here's 500 games, all the games you need to play, right? This has solved my problem, right? Because you know me, BRAP, I care less about the money and more about just not being bothered by things that are a pain in my ass and don't add value to my life, right? Like that's a $300 solved problem, and like to a certain extent, like and I totally agree with what you're saying about the dynamic and what this proves, right? We've said people want luxury products, people want high end. Look, Apple does this thing where, quite frankly, it deliberately prices things more expensive than the others because people feel better when they buy a more expensive thing because it's clout, right? So we have all those market dynamics. But quite honestly, if you go back to my outlook at the beginning of the generation, I said the same thing. I didn't say this is why Xbox is going to be PlayStation, but I did say this is an incentivizing, right, inviting product positioning, right, for a console at this price targeted for 1440p resolution and play, particularly for people who own PCs, right? Because we talk a lot about people who own gaming PCs, but then also buy a PlayStation 5, so they have access to exclusives. Part of the reason to go after consoles is also for simplicity and not being bothered with drivers and not being bothered with some of the problems you have on the PC. So there are also, it would make sense to me to also have people who have a PC who would get an Xbox Series S because lots of gamers play at 1440p and that's their sweet spot, right? And for a while at the beginning of the generation, that was my setup. I had at one of my gaming PC stations, I had an Xbox Series S, took up a very small amount of space, kind of tucked it over in the corner, played well with the 1440p monitor I had. So to a certain extent, while I will always stand on data, right, and say the data says this, and this is a reason for you to shut up, right, with the noise that you're spewing. But by the same token, if I go back to my perspective on the market and what was going on with economic dynamics, I also say this is pretty incredible. I don't entirely get it, right?
Yeah. And I thought, why I wasn't proclaiming victory for Xbox at the start of the generation. I did think it was going to be more competitive though, because of that low cost of entry for a next generation console with the idea of, or with Game Pass, right? I was like, oh, that to me, it was like, okay, I could see that value proposition. I could see that kind of being a track, especially, during COVID, right? During, the recession and inflation, things like
BRAP, the rich session.
The rich session.
We weren't in a full blown recession.
Yes, we were in a full blown recession. We're in a recession, but the inflationary dynamics, right? Yeah, cost of gas, all those things, and egg prices up 30%, 37% now, because of H1. Was it the bird flu, the H1N1 or whatever it's called?
My electricity bill.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't say this to. And the only reason I talk about the pundits is because I just think it's important to highlight, frankly, the stupidity that I often hear, even today, when you hear things like hardware is God, what's the word? I keep forgetting the word.
Incidental. The people don't care about it. Like I said this, like the show where we went over that. I'm like, you're totally skating by the fact that the entire reason for the existence of the PC gaming market is because it is entirely made up of people who give a crap about hardware. That's why they buy gaming PCs. People are not going out and spending $1,000 on hardware because on hardware to game on because they think the hardware is incidental and they don't care about it and it's a commodity.
I mean, clearly, NVIDIA having different tiers of GPUs is proof of that. that NVIDIA is saying to us, consumers don't want just 4090s. If I know you said the 4090 is not a consumer card, but consumers don't want the 80 series or the 70 series. They want a 60 series GPU. So again, I mean, and then to all the talk about consoles are dying, and then you see the PlayStation 5 outperforming the PlayStation 4, which was a successful console for Sony. This to me doesn't say, oh, consoles are dying. This says to me that the business that PlayStation is in consoles is very good for them. And they're good at making video game consoles. They just are. And we see that with other consumer products. There's certain companies that are just inherently better at doing things than other companies. I mean, look, BMW makes better cars than, probably Kia, right? It just is what it is. Michelin makes better tires than I'm trying to think of a tire brand.
Goodyear.
Well, Goodyear has some good tires, but Michelin has the top of the line Defender. But it's interesting to your point about, we talk about like the market stratification, right? And different consumers. I'm going to bring out tires here. I mean, do we, and this is I feel like we talk about this a lot, but this is it frustrates me, Logic. I mean, do we have the same conversation with other consumer products? Do we yell at Michelin for, I just spent $1,600 today on a set of 4 tires. And I ended up going with the Michelin Defenders, by the way, Logic. And
hey, Michelin priced those tires at $240 a pop. They're cooked.
They're cooked, yeah. Tires are incidental. But here's the thing, and this is my point, that I didn't have to buy $1,600 tires. I could have easily spent under $1,000. But when I did the research and I was thinking about what I wanted for my vehicle, right? And also peace of mind was important to me, right? I just bought a travel trailer. I'm gonna be pulling that with my vehicle. I have a full-size SUV, and the Defenders give me that peace of mind towing that travel trailer and because of the additional weight of towing, there's more wear and tear stress on the tire. Now, all the research I'm doing is like, okay, look, let's like that. You're going to get a lot of tread life out of this tire. It lasts long. It handles well. And to me, it's like, it was worth that investment of $1,600. Right. But I only share this story because, again, so there's going to be another consumer who's going to look at the Defenders and be like, no, I'm good. I don't need that.
Yeah, I need, you know, you're gonna, and your stratification of market, right? You're gonna have a customer who says, "Bruh, I just need tires on the car. I don't really care,
exactly.
right? Just tell me the lowest cost thing with the cheapest level of access. That's all I want." Then you're gonna have that mid-tier consumer who says, you know, "Hey, if you know, I want a tire that's good, but I don't want the most expensive tire." One thing Ryan Landis mentions, you know, BRAP, would you even care which tire brand is number one? Or you just want the right tires for you. And in this, just, I mean, we're painting the backdrop to a scenario, Ryan, but, you know, Brap and I have talked about this throughout the week, because I'm also getting Defender 2s tomorrow, put on my Subaru. And no, we didn't just want the tires that were right for us. We deliberately went out and researched and literally looked for what is the best tire. And unless it is astronomically expensive and only something that Mark Cuban can afford, we want that tire. We don't want the tire that's good enough. We don't want the four $1,000 tires. We don't want the tires that undercut the competition. We want the best tire commercially available for our vehicles. And that's what we bought. And what our contention is that, again, there's that market stratification, right? That those types of consumers exist. And that's the frustration, right, with the arguments. The arguments suggest that those customers don't exist. Oh, customers won't go buy the expensive thing. Customers will only go and buy the cheaper thing. That's a ludicrous argument in my mind.
I mean, look, you look at, again, I drive a full-size SUV, right? You have people going out and spending $100,000, sometimes more than $100,000 for Cadillac Escalades. You know? I mean, what does that tell you? I mean, there are cheaper full-size SUV options on the market outside the Escalade, but people are buying them, and that's my point. Like, I think people try to put consumers in one bucket, and you can't put consumers in one bucket. You just can't. And the same thing applies to gaming. You want gamers that want high-end gaming experience and even high-end console experiences. We had the same conversation with the PS5 Pro. Oh my God, it's $700. I get it. I get the sticker shock. I get it. But understand that there are people that are willing to pay that because that's important to them. Because to your point, Logic, they want the best.
Yeah, and that's and that's why, look, we constantly talk about the laws of economics. I constantly bring up Adam Smith and writing Wealth of Nations in the late 1700s, right? And these things continuously prove themselves over and over and over. Which my
chief economist quoted, by the way, right. The other day.
Yeah. You know, look, the suppliers are not delivering stuff to the market because they think that nobody wants it. Well, let me pick the thing that nobody wants and let me spend all my effort and investment on making that. No, the market's delivering multiple products that hit at different price points because it senses that it does analysis and it finds, right, that the truth is that there are multiple types of consumers who want different things at different price points, and that you have high-end consumers who want expensive stuff, who want only the best. You know, I mean, look, you know, the Apple versus Android, right? Way more numerically, right? The enumeration of the total number of Android handsets that is sold is significantly greater than iPhones. But a lot of those phones are free, low, cheap. The manufacturers barely scrape by making any margins. And in fact, many of them don't make margin at all, right? Apple's margins are like redonkulous in comparison to what it takes to build an iPhone, right? But yet here we sit with Apple being a $300 trillion company and in the $1 trillion club amongst the 6 companies that have the highest market cap, right? Because there's a group of consumers who are willing to buy those things. But I'm sorry, you got a super chat from friend of the show, Everborn.
Oh yeah, Everborn Saga. Yep, Everborn, the $5 super chat says, I think the strategy worked. He's referring to Xbox X, Series X, Series S, that dual SKU. While they were delivering content, and 21 sales were strong, but in 2022, They lost all their momentum due to lack of content. Thank you for that. Thank you for the super chat, everyone. Appreciate it. Great seeing you in the live chat. What do you say, Elijah? What do you think about Everborn's super chat here? I'd have to go back and look at their sales. I don't remember. I know that they had good sales in 2021, but I wonder if that was more post-pandemic or pandemic, because we're still kind of in the pandemic at that time.
I mean, I hate to couch. I'm couching this way because you asked me a summary statement, right?
Yeah.
I'm not being entirely dismissive, right, of what Everborn said, and we kind of had a discussion analogous to this. I think the first time that I was on GCP, I get that, and I understand it. That causality and that fault is still at Xbox's feet, right? Whether it's clearly there's a coupling between their software performance, right, and how that is an input variable, right, to how well their hardware sales. And at the end of the day, in terms of their overall business, right, that has been a drag coefficient, right, on them selling hardware. So and then from that we can see where there was an Achilles heel to that strategy. So yea, verily, maybe that dual SKU strategy would have fared well across the generation. But the problem with it is that you didn't keep pace with what needed to be done from the software side, and in particular, as you get into that dynamic, that also is a thing that I bring up that I think feeds some potentially bad behaviors, right, and again leads to bad performance in the software space. Is that you stood up a subscription service, and the subscription service constantly needs to be fed. Right. I mean, when you compare it to a video streaming service, right? The way that video streaming service tamps down churn, which is a negative impact to a subscription service, right? Because the whole point of the subscription service is to ramp up operational cash flow, right, and make that healthy and make that appear, as a bright spot, right, on a balance sheet. You're challenged to do that when you have people constantly jumping into their service and jumping out, right? Because then your operating cash flow doesn't show consistency, right? And therefore investors don't look at that as being reliable. And so the part of the problem is, from a content perspective and a software perspective, is you constantly have to feed the subscription service. That means a thing. In my mind, right, from a software engineering, software development, portfolio management, pipelining perspective, yeah, we've talked about this extensively before, so I won't get into tons of the details. You need content, marquee content, consistently showing up right in the subscription service, and then you actually need enough studios to have that backed up with reserve rounds, right? Because some of your dev teams are going to miss, and you have to have content to kind of plug into that space and fill that hole so you don't have gaps. And that's the challenge, right, that Xbox has experienced. It looks like, again, we're going to get around to talking about the developer direct. It looks like the release slate for at least the first half of 2025 looks like it addresses that problem, right? Because you've got games coming out in February, you've got games coming out in April, and games coming out in May. That is the type of place that you need to be. Oh, by the way, when I did this statistical analysis, right, and quantitative analysis, I said, right, that the production pipeline of Xbox would start hitting on all cylinders in 2025, right? And don't expect it sooner than that. It would have been incredible if they would have hit right in the back quarter of 2024, but my calculation showed 2025, and yea, verily, that may be where we're arriving at right now.
Yeah, I think the other. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think the other thing too, about this article, the numbers from Circana, I think it also points to why Microsoft has pivoted in their strategy. And actually, Phil Spencer talked about this today. He mentioned that, he said, look, we love our platform and our hardware, but we're not going to put walls up where people can engage with the great games our studios are building. Your games will show up in more places, no doubt. I mean, so I think, and I said this before, if you're in a business where software sales are predicated on selling hardware, and you're not selling hardware, what do you do? And especially if after you spent billions of dollars in acquiring studios, the logical step is to bring your games to other platforms. So, and I think that decline, I think would you say Xbox Series X and S are down 18%, behind 18% to the Xbox One, which is arguably Microsoft's worst console generation in terms of hardware sales. So I think that speaks to that pivot in their business strategy.
Yeah, everyone's saying something I absolutely agree with. He's like, what happened in 2022 was entirely their fault. I just don't think the 2 SKU strategy was bad in theory. They just didn't execute. Everyone, I totally agree with that. In fact, I think, I'm not sure how long you've been here. I said the exact same thing. Like, to me, the dual SKU strategy made complete sense. And then pairing and coupling that with the subscription service made complete sense. This goes back to my, I'm not saying, look, Everborn, I'm not frustrated with you. I'm like frustrated with the people who always come in here guns blazing, right, as if we're trying to tear down Xbox. I have consistently said, and I know that people in the chat who are regulars are tired of hearing me saying it, I've consistently said, by the vast majority, I never have any problem with the strategic outlook and intent of Xbox. The strategic things that they've talked about doing make sense to me. I was totally on board and acknowledged when they said, hey, our competition isn't really PlayStation, right? With the game we're playing is that our competition is really Amazon and Google, right? And I totally said, okay, so the MAU game makes sense. Right, if your deterrent, if your Minuteman, ICBM, nuclear arsenal that you're trying to build is to say, hey, my silos are pointed at your mainland, and if you come over here, right, and try and get in the gaming space, right, hardcore, just look at my MAU number, right, because the big 6 always talk MAU, right? You're not going to be able to catch up with my MAU number, and we all know that that's what all of our investors look at. Right. And so we're not going to be challenged. That totally makes sense. The current pivot totally makes sense. I'm not selling a crap ton of hardware, so I'm not going to gate my software to only selling to the people who are on my hardware. That doesn't make any sense because the investment that I'm having to make per title is still the same. So why am I going to invest the same amount of money to sell to people who are 9.85% of the console market? Right. Same argument. I despise Satya for making this choice, but again, we've gone over it numerous times. Same choice Satya made about Windows Phone, right? And in hindsight, I get it. At the time, I was super salty, right? But like, I get it. He wanted to put his software where the users were, and those users were on iPhone and on Android, more specifically, even on Samsung, right? And that's why Samsung ships with Office 365 on it, and why there was DeX for a period of time. Right, totally get it. Most of their strategic stuff, I never have any problems with. Kind of like you were saying, Everborn, the problem is always with execution, right? And that brings us to the developer direct, right? The one reason I say the developer direct was good was because I said the week before, the best way for this show to go down would be for us to see no one from the GLT, and we didn't see anyone from the GLT. And I've turned the corner on my assessment of Microsoft's problems with marketing and PR and messaging. And I'm standing on the square that the best thing for Microsoft right now, for Xbox right now, is for us to never see Phil Spencer, Sarah Bond, or Matt Booty. They are the poison ink in the well. And I put that on all of them. I used to separate them. I used to say Phil was the problem and Matt Booty was the problem. Sarah was still good. But I think even in recent months with the whole everything's an Xbox, I don't even want to see Sarah. And look, I got to be feeling a certain way to say I don't want to see Sarah Bond on stage. Because there are many times I don't care what Sarah Bond is saying to me. Right? I just want her to show up. She can say whatever she wants to. So, but now I'm at the point where like I think the GLT and all of this like gaming politics and like used car slickster salesman I think gamers don't need to see any of that. Gamers just need to see the games. I agree, Jason Ames. I totally agree. But since June of 2002, I think things have just been going downhill, and I think I think she could just move on. So next thing we want to get into, we're going to get into the segment of the week's foolishness and the week's Chivos, and break down the Xbox Developer Direct. So 4 games shown, ish, right? And then the extra credit of Ninja Gaiden 2 Black. So Ninja Gaiden 4, I keep calling it Project Midnight, which is still an advancement from when I used to call it Bijou Bayou, South of Midnight. Doom: The Dark Ages, and what was the fourth game that was shown? It's actually the third game.
Expedition 33.
Oh yes. Expedition 33.
30, yeah.
So kind of interesting to me that for the developer direct, 50% of the games were first party. But all of these, by most measures,
Aaron Greenberg is saying Ninja Gaiden is first party because they're publishing it.
Okay, yeah, I would accept that. It's become a thumb rule that Xbox has applied, so that's fine and that's consistent. All of those games, 3 out of the 4 of those games confirmed, known, and displayed on the screen as going to PlayStation 5. The suspicion is that South of Midnight will go to PlayStation 5 as a timed exclusive, right? So probably I'm just assuming 3 months ish after, like Great Scott. If you put Indiana Jones on PlayStation 5 3 months right after release, there's no reason for me to believe that South of Midnight isn't going to do the same thing. BRAP, what was your overall feeling of the takeaway of the show?
I like what you said about the GLT just not being on screen. I love the presentation of this Xbox Direct. Get to the developers, show us the games. No Phil Spencer, no Sarah Bond, just games. Just the developers, the studios talking to us about the games that they're creating. I thought the presentation, the pacing was awesome. Ninja Gaiden 4. Thank you. Ninja Gaiden, and I talked
the original Souls game before there were Souls games.
I mean, yeah, I mean it's kind of like the original Souls game before there were Souls games. I mean, Ninja Gaiden was not an easy game. That's why I said if you're new to Ninja Gaiden, you're picking up Ninja Gaiden 2. Yeah. And the camera angles, the camera doesn't help, by the way. But Ninja Gaiden, historically, at least for the Xbox, was one of those games on the original Xbox that was really Tomonobu, I forget his name, Itagaki-san, was a Team Ninja at the time, the creator behind Ninja Gaiden, and here comes Xbox, the new kid on the block, and they land Ninja Gaiden as an exclusive on the original Xbox. So there's a lot of history there with Gaiden in the Xbox, because at the time that was such a big deal. I remember when Itagaki-san, Team Ninja, they announced Ninja Gaiden for the Xbox, and I remember Itagaki-san saying for what I want to do, what I want to create, the kind of game I want to create, I can't do that anywhere else except for Xbox, the original Xbox. And when that game released, is one of the more highly critically acclaimed games for the Xbox. It was visually stunning at the time. It was hard. So for me as somebody that's been in the Xbox ecosystem for 20 some odd years, and for those who don't know, I was an Xbox Live beta tester.
I heard that rumor. That's pretty amazing. I'm still trying to track down corroboration of that, but I believe you with conviction when you say it.
You can ask Lemieux66 on Twitter, because that's how we met, and I still talk to him. I've had him on the show too, but we met on Xbox Live, chance encounter, and 20 something years later, we're still 23 years later, we're still we still communicate, we still talk to each other. So seeing Gaiden was huge, Logic. I mean, it's cool that it's being co-developed by Platinum and Team Ninja. Definitely has that Platinum Games vibe to it. A lot of hack and slash. I mean, there's that in previous Gaiden games, but I thought this was a great announcement. I loved that they started off with Ninja Gaiden, because that kind of set the tone, I think, for the rest of the show. And
what would you say if I told you that my assessment was that, while I appreciate your and the community's romanticizing of Ninja Gaiden, which has been going on for quite some time, I believe that game's relevance was at its peak 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But I don't expect it to have the same type of impact on the market today.
I wouldn't disagree with you. I think that game has hit it's not where it was, like you said, 15, 20 years ago. You know, and I don't think that it's going to be a game that probably appeals to a lot of people. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong. But knowing what I know about Gaiden and then what I saw, and this isn't a criticism of the game. I'm going to be there day one. But I think in terms of mass market, probably not. Doesn't mean it's going to be a bad game. I hope it's going to be a good game.
Yeah, I mean, I expect it to carve the same type of arc as a Souls game. Like it's going to sell in numbers that like another game would look at it and be jealous of those numbers. But at the end of the day, it still targets a niche of the market, and is a game that's only going to appeal right to it's not going to have the mass wide appeal, of other games of other types. And this is and so here's marker one, right, for the people who have said that it was a great show. I believe it was a great show because of its structure, and its messaging and its content. Like I've always, even though look, I was a Phil Spencer disciple and I drank the Kool-Aid, and I used to enjoy hearing about like the gaming philosopher, right, that is Phil Spencer, right, and kind of all of the things that he believed about gaming. I used to love that stuff, right? But and then by contrast, like I never understood who Sean Layden was or why I should care about who he was. I didn't feel he never spoke to me as a gamer. That being said, I have always loved this structure of these types of shows. It is very much kind of the Ubisoft format. I mean, that's why I've always said, quite frankly, for many years in E3, like when people would constantly say PlayStation won E3, Xbox won E3, I was like, no, Ubisoft won E3, like because their presentation, even up to this date, despite all the Ubisoft nickel backing, the format of their show is the creative director comes out, sometimes with the producer. They talk about the game, and I mean at a creator level, and they convey what the game is and why they built it, right, and what they are trying to message, right, and to convey in the art of the game. And then there is a long session of there's a trailer, but then there's a long session of actual gameplay, right, and then the creative director and the producer come out like again, right, and continue on, right. So that packaging and the devs being on stage is what I've always loved. And there are tons of people who are like, I don't want to hear from the developers and all the techno babble, right? And I'm like, no, that's actually who I want to hear from, because that's what tells me what the game is about and why I should give a crap about the game. So I love the structure. The splash of Ninja Gaiden, I think, is a peep. And so that's marker one for me about why I wouldn't be like, running off to the hills about how great a show this was. But that's just me.
I like, to your point about the developers, I love seeing their enthusiasm and the passion they have for the games they're creating. I love it. We talked about earlier in the show, the art form of gaming, right? You really see that in the developer directs. You see the excitement, the passion, what they're trying to create for gamers. And so when gamers say dumb shit like, oh, this game is woke, or that protagonist is ugly, like, I'm just like, you guys are idiots. Like, these people are literally pouring their hearts and souls into creating these great experiences for us to enjoy. Look, and that's fine if it's not a game, like if you're like, hey, Guidance not for me, or Expedition 33, whatever, that's fair. But the other stuff is just ridiculous. And so I love that perspective that we get in having them walk through, like, I mean, Doom the Dark Ages, walking through how this game, like how they said, like with the last Doom, it was more about verticality. Now this game's a little more grounded, but we've added these other elements, these other mechanics to the game. We add these things like the I forget the shield that he has now. I called it the Captain America shield. But I forget what the shield is. They have a freaking mech in Doom now, and I'm like, hell yeah! Like, that is, I mean, look, it's not revolutionary to throw in a mech in a game, but for Doom, like, like, yeah, like but you could feel the enthusiasm. Like, guys, like the last Doom game, we did this, and now we're doing this, and now we like it was exciting to see that, now. So my perspective logic with the show was that I thought it was great. And I think if I heard you correctly, I think for you, it's great because the developers are talking about the games that they're working on. They're kind of walking you through that, right? So for you, it's more about the developers than it is the actual games. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, so
Yeah.
as we always do, let's bucketize and compartmentalize, right? My comments, right? So my comment that I don't think Ninja Gaiden is the big splash that some people will talk about it being, is a business assessment and how I think it will play on the market and the commerciality of it. From the creative perspective, and me as a gamer, not in my wheelhouse. I'm not going to play it, but again, like, it's one of those games that I'm like, I'm glad it's there for people. I know that there are people who are passionate and have lots of nostalgia about the Ninja Gaiden series. I know that there are people who like are hungry for this alternative to a Souls game, right? That in some ways provides a lot of the same like difficulty challenge, right? Thirst that people are looking for. But does it differently. Like, isn't as much of a timing game as an execution game, right? And so I'm glad it's there. I'm glad that people are going to show up for it. I am glad that it exists to address the part of the market that wants it. That's my right creative uptake and perspective as a gamer. My business uptake, right? And I'm partially saying this before people go running off to the hills with what I'm sure some of the other content creators are saying. Is this a game that bumps Game Pass numbers? I don't think overall. I think it will cause some Game Pass churn. So I think there will be a momentary lift for Game Pass because I think there are people who are interested in this game. But I think that's going to wind up being churn. I don't think those people show up for Ninja Gaiden and stay for the other 500 games in Game Pass. And I don't think it moves console numbers. But from a portfolio perspective, a production pipeline perspective, I think it's a good piece of content to have in there.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so for me, I think the games he showed, and then having the developers talk about their games, that solidified this being one of the better, or probably the best developer direct that I've enjoyed, that I've from Xbox to date. Now, obviously, I mentioned Gaiden, so I'm Gaiden biased in that regard. So that's going to up the score for me a little bit. I'm not going to give the developer direct a score, but I really tell you what game really got me excited was, or developer got me excited for their game, was the developers behind Expedition, Clear Obscure Expedition 33. The initial trailer reveal that I saw, I forgot when they revealed it. Logic, when was that?
I think it was Summer Game Showcase last year. Yeah, Summer Showcase sounds right.
Yeah, and I remember like seeing it, and I was like, "Oh, this looks interesting." The turn-based combat, and then we find out that's a smaller studio, I think in Paris, or maybe not Paris, somewhere in France.
I don't think it's Paris. I think it's somewhere in France. Yeah,
somewhere in France, and I'm like, "This is awesome." Small studio, and you can see the creative vision, their minds churning when they're talking to you about the world they wanted to create, the visual aesthetic, and not necessarily making a game about bad versus or good versus evil. And I'm like, oh, this sounds interesting. And hearing that passion and the thought they put into trying to create something artistically different, and even their approach to turn-based combat, real-time turn-based combat, and the skill trees, I'm like, and you saw like they talked about like, hey, we created this, this real-time turn-based combat system. We play tested it. It didn't really work. So we went back to the drawing board, and to me, that's awesome that we got to see that they even talked about it. Hey, like, we wanted to create something that was enjoyable. We had this mechanic in place that just didn't work. So we went back and we course corrected, which some people might call that mismanagement. But I that was probably one of the highlights for me is that game. I mean, it's a new game, and it just looks look, I had interest. I've had a lot of interest in South of Midnight, but I think Expedition 33 might have like been the one game that I was like that I thought about the most after the developer direct, more than any of the other games.
Yeah, I love the pitch and the premise for Expedition 33. Like in a lot of cases for like movies and games, like a thing that gets me on board is just like what's your pitch? Like what is what is the story, right? What is the tapestry behind this? And
Yeah.
Expedition 33, like that, it's going to be interesting to see where this IP goes, because I would go see an Expedition 33 movie. I would watch an Expedition 33 television show. I would play all sorts of stuff, right? I would read an Expedition 33 book, whatever. I love the premise of that world. What I saw, as much as I've been hooked by like the interest in the tweak on the gameplay that they're taking, what I actually love from this trailer was a lot of the story elements that we saw. A lot of the relationships between characters. I think that game, I'm not this type of person. I've never my eyes have never watered up, right? I've never cried over a video game. I know some people have become emotional for video games. That's just not, where I exist. But like I feel like that game is going to tell a powerful emotional story. I think you're going to get very connected and tied to people in that game. And then I think not all of them are going to make it, right? So I think those things being rendered on the screen are going to be super powerful, right? Just the philosophical premise of like, oh my God, every year like a generation is wiped off the map, right? And if this Expedition 33 doesn't succeed, it's very kind of Hunger Games-ish, right? And say what you will about Hunger Games and what they did with that, but the reason for the popularity of Hunger Games was the pitch, was the premise. Like, hey, every year we ask for people to like be tribute, right? To go play these games as a means for us, like the rest of us, to not constantly go to war. So like the premise of this is like, hey, if this Expedition 33 doesn't succeed, then like all the 33-year-olds are going to be wiped out, and like the 32-year-olds are going to be left, right? And there's so many like mini like sci-fi stories and things that like have these kind of premises and stuff that, yeah, it's just super interesting. I don't think it's not a game, again, because what I mentioned of kind of the corner I'm turning. I was super hyped for it last year when my outlook of who I was as a gamer was different. I don't know that this is going to be a game that I spend a ton of time with, but again, like I love the fact that it's landing on the market. That's just everything. The one worrisome bit that I have in the back of my head is that I feel like this game occupies a lot of the same type of space as Unknown 9 Awakening, and Unknown 9 Awakening has not done good. So what I worry about is what's going to be the uptake on this game. And it's being made available on PlayStation, so that's good. It's going into Game Pass, which I think is just going to have an impact on the total sales, right, on the Xbox side. So it's just going to be interesting to see how it plays out, from a commerciality perspective on the market. I'm hoping and believing that it shows up to great critical acclaim, and hopefully gets itself into some award shows, as well for the year.
Yeah, I hope so too. I'm looking at. I pulled up the trailer here, and I love the visual aesthetic here. You talked about that you thought that, or you think that there's going to be this game might elicit some emotional response from gamers who play it, because there could be like loss of life from characters. I don't disagree, because one of the things they talk about in the game is there's this, I forget what they call her. There's something, she appears and she writes a number, and that, like, if so basically basically what's happening is people are dying off younger now. And so you got to imagine that's probably going to be happening to some of the people that you interact with, Yeah. And so there's that dynamic of, I need to try to save these people, and that's probably not going to happen in some instances, right? And that's just going to further add to, I think, the emotional investment some people might have while playing this game, because I've had that certain games where I don't know if I've ever cried. Maybe I have. I may have with video games. To be honest with you, I can't think of anything right. I probably have. It might have been after a couple IPAs too, though. But that's not the point. But I love what I see here. I hope they stick the like we like to say stick the landing. I hope they stick the landing with this game because I do like what I've seen so far from this.
I agree. Yeah, and some guys pointed out in the chat it's she's the paintress, and she shows up every year and paints a number on the rock.
That's what is the paintress. Yeah.
It's him. Yeah. Azrael compares her to Thanos, right? Because it's like the finger snap, So yeah. So
it is like the finger snap.
Yeah. You mentioned it, South of Midnight, continuing to shape up well. I think everything that they show is interesting, right? And everything that they show, I think, is encouraging and incentivizing for people to get on board. Again, this is a story that I love for the storytelling perspective. I talked about, ever since I've seen this game, what it harkens back to is Cullen Bunn's Tales of Harrow County, which is set in a similar environment like Deep South, leans on Deep South Gothicism and mythology, talks about Haints, one of the best comics that I've ever read, particularly horror comics, and this harkens to that. I think it's gonna be well. I think it's gonna be the best we've seen from Compulsion games. How it plays out from a commerciality perspective, I don't know. I mean, I unfortunately think that this thing is going to be, along the lines of a Hi-Fi Rush in terms of the traction it gains. I think the best thing that can happen for it is for it to get over to PlayStation 5 as quickly as possible. But overall, from an artistic and creative perspective, I think it's going to be successful. And I think that's the thing that I will say. If you want to say that this was a great direct, that is where it absolutely stuck the landing. Is the 4 games that they showed were all great looking games from my perspective in terms of graphical fidelity, artistry, the stories that they're rendering. Even Doom, again, Doom is not a game that you talk about a lot about story, but I will say there's Doom lore, right? And there's kind of background kind of world building. And that again looks like it's on a positive trajectory, right? So my overall takeaway from the developer direct is good developer direct. Love the structure, love the fact that none of the GLT executives were there. Keep that up. Very exciting kind of road mapping that they showed, right, for the first half of 2025. I wish them all the best. I think all these games are going to be great, right, in their own way.
Game Pass is stacked April, May. But that's, to me, that is what I want. That, and I think I said this late last year. I go in and my interest in Game Pass depends on if Microsoft is releasing enough games within a window period, within a period of whatever months, where I'm like, okay, I'm going to stay in Game Pass because I know I'm going to play these 2, 3, or 4 games over the next 3 to 6 months, right? And they're going to have 3 games that I'm going to play in Game Pass. So for now they've kept the customer. For now.
No, I mean that's good. And I think we're just describing like the different types of customers that we are. That by definition, theoretically, there must be different types of customers on the market. I know for me, I just got to a point where the unreliability of and the volatility of what interest I would have in games in the library in either service, and that I would make time for them, just became dubious. So for me, it stopped being a matter of like, hey, are other bangers showing up, right? It just became a matter of, does this thing need to be part of my access pathway to games? Yes or no. It just became binary, right? And I decided there just wasn't enough there from a consistency and reliability perspective. So, but I'm glad to hear you're still stacking cards from Green Man Gaming or whatever. Next week's foolishness and Chivos is EA lost $6 billion in market value following FC25 and Dragon Age underperformance news. So this news story over on VGC. I don't know who the hell wrote it. So VGC by Andy Robinson. On Wednesday, EA warned the market that it now expects a decline in its live service revenue for its current fiscal year after previously forecasting growth. Primarily, the decline was attributed to an FC25 slowdown during the Christmas period. In addition, EA said that the BioWare RPG Dragon Age: The Veilguard, released in October, has missed its expectations by around 50%, with 1.5 million players reached, meaning that they had a target for about 3 million units. The publisher had lost $6 billion from its market value of $37.3 billion. That is the sign. That is the market cap of some of their next nearby competitors, not too far down the rung, right? Because I've talked about how in the gaming industry, there's some very small number of publishers actually make up 70 something percent of the revenue, right, or maybe even more, and the rest is left over for smaller players. So you don't go too many rungs further down the ladder before you start hitting publishers who are 6 billion in size themselves. So that's in some cases a whole publisher. Following the pre-earnings news, EAFC generates around $2 billion annually, and around 800 million of that is made up by Ultimate Team. So the interesting thing I'll point to here, because we're in the segment of the show where we like to do a lot of debunking, a lot of people love to say that games need to be on every platform and that solves the problem. Well, Dragon Age Veilguard was on multiple platforms. So that is not the silver bullet, I don't think, that some people will assert that it is. So not a proof of success, because there's a lot of hand waving that says if you only put your games on every platform, then your game will be successful. But I don't think that's the case. So I mean, there it is. I don't personally think, I'm not going to say this is a nothing burger, right? But what I believe is that publishers of this size have some ride through capability, and they can have down years. I don't think they can do consecutive down years multiple times in a row, but I think they can get away with one, and then they can do some things to turn it around. Activision had Call of Duty Vanguard, which was not a popular entrance in the Call of Duty series. It was not a great year. They didn't make the numbers that they normally make, but it was a blip, right? So the question is, are they able to turn these things around? BRAP, any differing long-term outlook or projection?
No, I don't. It's important that you highlighted that putting your games everywhere isn't this magic bullet. I think you said magic bullet, but it's just not.
Silver bullet, yeah, which is a term that we frequently use in the software industry, right? Because it's this reference that normally we apply to development, but it's this reference that look, these problems are so complex that there is no one thing that you do and that that fixes the problem,
Yeah, the issues are more nuanced than just you release your games everywhere, right? Because that has been that's what we often read and hear some of the pundits who like to say, the future is putting your games everywhere because you want to put your games in front of more gamers, get more sales, and that it just doesn't work out that way. It's not as simple as that. So all right, Logic stepped away for a second, I think. Yeah, he's gonna be right back. All right, did I miss any super chats here? Let's see here. Priscilla says something about dragons and mechs and Doom. We'll go back to Doom real quick. Yeah, the dragon and the mech in Doom. Yeah. I'm trying to read the chat here, catch up on some things I may have missed. Barney says Doom and Ninja Gaiden are well recognized. A lot of people buy those IPs for nostalgia. Jago 6's all game show will be in Game Pass day and date. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They kept my and I stacked what you do, Priscilla. I don't want to make that long commitment to Game Pass. I don't know. I don't want to pay for something I'm not going to be really using. What's up, Ghost in the Garage Gaming? Oh, thank you, Ryan. Yeah, so I bought so Ryan, I know we're going off topic here. Just waiting for Logic to come back, but I ended up buying a travel trailer, 33-foot long travel trailer. Has a slide. So the slide's the part that pops out, for those who don't know. So thank you. I appreciate that, Brian.
So next topic we want to go on to is will gamers stop buying games when games are $100? In the article that I referenced here is one that is very near and dear to my heart. It is over on Tech Raptor, The Cost of Gaming Since the 1970s by Robert Grosso. And the reason why it's near and dear to my heart is because a few years ago, I can't remember when, I think it was tied to one of my old Twitter accounts, that I went scorched earth and quit Twitter because I got tired of all the console warring. But I did this analysis using this article and these numbers, and I squelched down to where, if you look at the past 50 years of the gaming industry, right thereabouts or so.
Logic, what is this math I'm looking at here? What is this? What is this?
Wait, what are you talking about? I don't see
the cost of 1977 cost at launch for the Atari.
Oh, okay. So
$200.
Before he gets into it, I'm just going to say right now, I don't agree. I don't agree with the inflation argument. I agree that the math is sound on it and that it is real, but I don't think it reflects the real world interpretive impact of how a customer feels when they're at the cash register.
I by the way, I don't disagree with you. If a customer was paying $60 for a game and now it's 70, they're looking at the relative cost. Oh, I'm paying more. I'm paying $10. I don't disagree.
Yeah. So what I use this article for is, as BRAP is scrolling through it, you will see the average game cost, right, in a year, and that's the number that, if you think about, like, what is the mainline cost of a game, and so, like, through these generations, right, and there are lots of people who pull numbers, and they'll say, well, you know, we paid $90 for a game or $80, and yes, like, sometimes we did pay for those when they were like a 32x game, right, or some game that had like additional memory on a chip in the cartridge, right? So there are those outliers, but by and large, right, there was a baseline game for the vast majority of mainline product, right, on a console. And if you look at those numbers, right, since the inception of the industry, what you're going to kind of see is that those costs have gone from $30, right, to $40 to $50 to $60, right, to $70. And if you map it out, which I did this in an analysis a few years ago, and what you'll see is that over time, the average cost of the mainline gaming product available on most consoles of the generation has increased somewhere between, on average, like every 8 to 12 years, right, over time. And what we saw in the blip from $60 to $70 is we saw an extended amount of time, because that time period lasted 14 years. And so it was outside the norm of what we have historically seen in the gaming market. And so that's one of the reasons why I say, the people who complain about $70 games, I'm like, understand that you enjoyed $60 games for about 6-ish years longer than you would have, like the game, if I base it on past historical trend analysis, the price of games should have bumped to $70, around 2014, 2015, right? And so this leads me to a few beliefs. First of all, I believe that we will see the next bump to $80 in much shorter time, right? Because I think where the industry is going to do is they're going to try and jump ahead, right, to catch up for lost time, right? I think the industry is well aware that they raise prices, right, every 8 to 12 years, and so they feel there's a bathtub effect from how long they stuck to the $60 price point. And so I think to compensate for that, they're going to jump from $70 to $80 faster than the historic norm, right? So I think games will go to $80 in less than the 8-year time frame. The other thing it leads me to believe is that there was this quote this week I think driven by this notion that GTA 6 could be a $100 game, which I don't think GTA 6 will be a $100 game. But there was this notion that if games go to $100, people will stop buying games. And I think there were some caveats to that, like, they won't buy them day one, right? Which is already happening at $70 games. And so, first of all, I'm going to cast aspersions on that punditry. People have been pumping the brakes on buying day one games for time immemorial, right? There have been people who have been dissuaded from buying a game at the current going market price forever, right? In the belief that waiting to buy the game, right, will allow them to access a price cut or whatever, right? We also have the time of the non-digital age when you didn't always know what the release date of a game was. So saying that popping to $100 will be the causality by which people stop buying games on game one, I think is a little ludicrous. The other thing I will say is
I've cooked.
The other thing I will say is, I went back and did this analysis, right, and looked at the average price of games kind of creeping on, which is just, again, law of economics, Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, constantly dwindling value of the dollar. It happens. As you're sitting in your seat watching me on your boob tube, right, the value of the dollar in your pocket is declining. It's becoming less. The dollar in your pocket will buy you less tomorrow than it will buy you today. That is a law of economics, and it is real, and it does not change. Right? So as we have advanced the price of games, people have not stopped buying games. And as we talked about earlier, there's this stratification of the market, and there are people who always buy stuff. That's why there are people who still buy games at $70 that sell very well. Yes, market dynamics are changing, and there's live service games and microtransactions, blah, 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 blah. Right? But by virtue of increasing the price of games, people aren't stopping buying games. So I don't think it's going to happen at $100. It's one of the reasons why on our agenda, I titled this section, Will Gamers Stop Buying Games When Games Are $100? I titled it that way because games are going to become $100 at some point in the timeline. It's an inevitability. So part of the punditry that's going around is saying that games will never be $100. That's false. Absolutely incorrect. There is a point in the timeline where video games will be $100. And at that price point, just like you've had to do for every price point, you will have to make choices and decisions whether or not that form of entertainment is still of value to you and still important enough to you to pay $100. It's just, that's just simple. That's just the way the world works.
Yeah, logic. Looks like Lord Azriel said, Game Logic, the old prices took into account the media costs as well. To shift to optical storage, lower the media costs, doesn't seem apples to apples, but it's an interesting conversation.
And I love, Azriel, the way you put that. Because again, this is one of the things that we rail against on this show, is that we don't rail against the notion that people have other opinions. We rail against the notion that people express them as absolutes and as if only they can be correct, as if there's no room for conversation, right? And you did not couch it that way, right? Yes, I understand. And I think there's a host of arguments that go along with that. Games no longer ship on every Wednesday of the month, right? And there's not this coordinated thing with UPS and FedEx to ship their games, right? To ship games on to not occur on the same day that they're shipping comic books, and to not, I'm sorry, not on Wednesday. When did video games used to ship? On Tuesday?
I thought it was Fridays. No, Tuesdays.
Yeah.
Tuesdays. Thank you.
Yeah, yes. And the whole reason for that is because FedEx and UPS went out and coordinated with everybody who had to make these big mass recurring shipments. And so DVDs and videos I think they were on Mondays. Tuesdays was video games, and then Wednesdays was comic books, right? And that was a very deliberate thing. So yes, there's an argument that goes along with this that says, hey, because video games don't ship anymore, like costs should be less. Because video games don't print on media anymore, costs should be less. And part of my counter argument to that is, okay, but storage costs are still costs, cloud costs are still costs. a huge cost in the digital age is data egress and ingress. And like if you've ever messed with like Amazon pricing, like those things drive your costs up the wall in terms of cloud spend. That being said, I'm also not going to, all I say when I say that is I don't know enough of the numbers behind that to say that it's definitely more expensive to do business transactions right in the cloud age with software than it was when you used to ship things on a UPS truck or vice versa. But I agree with you with the way that you said it. It's an interesting conversation to have. So yeah, I don't disagree with you there. But what I will say from a business aspect, and I talk about this in terms of inflation, right? People ask this question: hey, inflation is down. Why am I still paying so much money for eggs and milk? Right? And I'm like, yeah. Once a supplier raises prices due to inflation, they are not giving that price up because inflation goes down. Because what they've seen is that the market is willing to pay that price, right? So they don't back down and back off of it. I think that's the reason why, right? I think the supplier said people are willing to pay $60 for games. The fact that I don't print them on media and ship them, I mean, if there is cost savings of that, I'm putting that cost savings in my pocket to preserve margin, right? I'm not saying, hey, I'm passing that savings. Right? We often hear I'm passing costs onto the customer. I think it's very infrequently that we hear, yeah, I'm passing those savings on to the customer. Those savings wind up going to corporation profit margins and to investors, right? In terms of drip, not drip, but just dividend payouts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially if you got to imagine too, especially if the cost of development is going up and they're saving money in one area, they're going to allocate that cost savings to offset the rising cost of development, right? They're gonna move that money around. But I think what's interesting in this article is, and Logic, I'm big on the $60 in 2005 and 2020 $79. And again, I know you said this like about the relative price of consumers don't look at things like that. I don't because they don't. I don't disagree. But Game Industry Biz did do a similar article where they broke this down, and they talked about games like are we paying more for games now than we were 20 years ago, and they did the math backwards. They talked about the inflationary dynamics that in fact if you were to buy a game in 2005 and the Xbox 360 at $60, that's equivalent of paying almost $80 in 2020. That number's higher now in 2025. And so that's that. I think what you talked about earlier, the value of the dollar, right? So I it's interesting, like the punditry, in particular, one individual said the industry's cooked, and I'm like, no, the industry's not cooked, because I mean, what do we talk about? We talk about the free market on the show. We talk about suppliers. You talk about what consumers. You just said it. Consumers are like, hey, the supplier knows if I'm selling a game at $60. Consumers already told me, I'm willing to pay $60 for a game. So I'm not going to charge you $10 less because now the game's available in a digital storefront, because I know the market's supporting that $60 price point. Unless the market sees that $60 price point on the digital storefront and they say, hell no, we're not going to pay for that. And then the supplier will adjust their price accordingly.
Unless I lose $6 billion in market cap in a day and $800 million at a football club ultimate team, right? Things like that can happen and you can have an impact, right? But but I would also say what we've tended to see is we don't see the one for one, I'm going to reduce the price here, because what we see is we see them go after other ways of monetization, right, to cover that gap. So yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I don't like the thing that, again, to not, right, to make it clear that it's not an anti-Xbox comment, I have said the exact same thing for the PlayStation. I'll call them PlayStation knuckleheads, who have come on here saying, oh, PlayStation will never rise prices, right, if Xbox drops out of the industry. I'm like, bruh, PlayStation's raising prices and Xbox is still in the industry. Again, we put these false ethical and moral frameworks on corporations, and corporations are not humans. Corporations don't go to church. corporations don't think that they need to tithe. That's not a moral rubric for them. Like, corporations have a fiduciary commitment and a requirement, legal actually, to do one thing: maximize return on investment from its investors. That's it, right? And so, yea, verily, if there is an opportunity in the market to raise a price on a thing, a corporation is going to raise prices. That's why there's a $700 PlayStation 5 Pro, right? In comparison to what the PlayStation 4 Pro was last generation. In their minds, it's justifiable, like raw materials, like foreign exchange rates, inflation, blah, 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 blah. Right. But my point is like, stop telling me that PlayStation's the good guy. And because they're the good guy, like they're not going to raise prices. Like they are. Right. So, it's not a matter of an Xbox comment or a PlayStation comment. It's a matter of the laws of economics. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, they still hold true today.
Yeah, and I always go back to the point, because I did think it was funny of, gamers, gamers won't, gamers will wait for a game to go on sale or something, just like they have for $70. That's something else I read. I'm like, but gamers have always been doing that. It wasn't a $70 price point that was a tipping point for gamers to wait for games to go on sale. They did it when I was growing up. We go to Babbage's. Oh, $50? No, I'm good. We'll wait for it to go on sale. And if it went on sale, we picked it up.
Like I said, part of it's information in the digital age, right? I distinctly remember, like, before like broadband went big, like you waited on magazines for reviews. So you'd see games show up, but you didn't know whether they were good or not. If you were fiscally responsible, then you would just wait to see the review. And in most cases, those reviews sometimes came out like weeks after the game showed up on shelves. By the time you got the magazine, right? Further time delay by the time you read it. So I distinctly remember, I always thought it was a good deal as a PC gamer, because I remember the magazine wouldn't come out till the game was already on sale. I'd read the magazine. I'd decide that by the time I would decide I want to go buy the game, it's already discounted by like $10. Right? That was like in the days before Steam, So I don't know. Like I said, there's multiple causes, and this is the thing, right? There's multiple causalities to the way buyers behave on the market. The singular cause of like games going to $100 isn't going to be the singular cause, right, for some mass about face of the market. Because first of all, like BRAP said, if that were to happen, then suppliers would adjust. Again, law of economics, right? And again, what's been disproven is this individual and the group of people around them said the exact same things when games went to $70, right? And yet here we are with a $100 billion plus industry that still makes money. And this is why I go back to the other thing: if consoles are dying, it's traditional models don't matter. Like, people aren't turning their backs on a $92 billion industry. Like, growth isn't happening. It's a challenge. People are cooked, mismanagement, whatever. I'm like, okay, but there's still, can we acknowledge that there's still $92 billion sitting there on the table? Am I just going to give that up? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Again, first rule of business, keep the customers that you have. It's important to pursue growth, and it's important to go after new markets, and it's important to go after the next guy, right? But the first rule is keep the customers that you already have, right? That is your business base. That is your business foundation. Sorry, go ahead, Brett.
Well, the other thing too is, we know people spend more than $100 on games today. I mean, look at Fortnite.
Early access.
Look at early access. I mean, so we know there's consumer behavior. We know there's consumers that are willing to invest considerable amounts of money in games that they see value in. I mean, and again, we do this with other consumer products. We'll go out and spend $200 on Air Jordans. We don't have to do that. You can go to Walmart and get the and ones for like $30.
Bro, I just ordered some Tatums today.
I mean, right? I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, everyone is like, oh my God, think fucking shoes. Shoes, people, are $200. Shoes. And you can go to Walmart and get $30 sneakers. But we're not saying the sneaker industry's cooked. Again, and I say that, and I only say it to prove this point. And again, consumers value things differently. They are consumers in the gaming market that will go out, and a lot of this was around GTA 6. And I guarantee, I look, and I feel confident saying this. It's been 13 years since GTA 5. And GTA is unique. And I think if there's any game that could probably pull this off, it's GTA, because it does two things: campaign, live service, right? And we know that people are willing to spend hundreds of dollars in live service games. We know this. We see it in Fortnite. You know, they might be able to do this, and I don't think it's good. And and this may or may not work for every game. You know, there may be some games, and this is the other thing. People, everyone's like, oh my god, every game's gonna be $100. No, it may not. Every game might not be $100.
Not initially. I mean, I think it's an inevitability that eventually.
No, I think so
price,
too.
Yeah,
I think yes. I think because if you look at, like you said, the trajectory of price increases, I mean, they've always gone up, and they're going to keep going up. At some point, you're going to hit $100. You know, so, but my only point is that this is if there's any game that could probably, it's GTA 6. I think there's a lot of pent up demand for this game because it's been 13 years, and it's a live service game. There's a campaign. And it's GTA. I mean, look, you saw what happened with the Madden NCAA football bundle. It was what, $130 for both games? That game,
and it charted.
It charted.
The bundle charted. The bundle charted. Yeah.
The bundle charted. And I'm like, what? The bundle. So what does that tell us about consumers? That people will pay top dollar. I don't understand why we have these arguments. Oh my God, no one's gonna. No, people will pay. That is you talked about GPUs earlier.
Yeah, we used to say we'll never pay $1,000 for GPUs.
I said I would never play. I said I would.
that just brings out a big, old hearty old man laugh. We'll never pay $1,000 for GPUs.
I mean, hell, I didn't think I'd ever pay $1,600 for a set of tires.
People used to say they would never pay like the notion that you would go to a vending machine and have to put a dollar bill in the slot to get a soda. To some people, that was never going to happen. It was always going to be coins because they were always going to be below that cost. But bruh, to get a soda out of a vending machine today, I need to have my iPhone with my card and Apple Wallet in a lot of cases. Like, you know, I don't carry enough cash in some cases to get a soda. Like, these things always happen.
Look, I mean, Ryan just brought something. You and I talked about this. Ryan brought this up. We said we'd never pay $1,000 for a phone.
Facts.
Remember?
Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah.
Remember Apple?
Used to be able to get an iPhone for $99, $199, right? Subsidized, but that was your buy-in cost, right? Now you pay the full price for the phone, and the phone is no longer a $499 phone subsidized. It's $1,000, and look, it's $1,000 for normal consumers, right? Right? Hamp's been buying foldables. In luxury phones. My phones are not $1,000. You know, so look, my last flourish on this is a bit of market hypothesis. What happens if games go to $100? Well, I mean, in my mind, part of this problem, right, also converges on this notion that AAA games are the problem, the constantly spiraling upward production costs. You need more of the industry to do more double A's and indies, but then I counter that with, okay, but when we do double A's and indies, people don't buy them. That's why you don't hear all these. That's why you don't see double, like, we constantly look at this MPT chart, and what is it? It's constantly AAA games, right? So look, how could that problem get addressed? Well, and then you combine that with the fact that, you know, lots of people in the industry feel like they're still undercharging gamers for the production costs, right, that are commensurate with a big AAA game, right? So the numbers that they have to achieve in sales keep going up, right, in their break-even point. So here's my personal feeling on it: is charge $100 for the game, charge $120 for the game, charge an amount for the game that has a knock on the supply-demand equation, and fewer people will buy the game. I think you settle yourself down to becoming okay with that as an industry, because what you say is, I am going to, by raising prices, I am going to forcibly move people down market. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill that market segment with the AA games that we no longer make at volume. Right? And my belief is that then those people will buy those games. And then I will thereby be able to the problem today is, if you make a game with lower production costs, you don't have an addressable market that has sent a demand signal that they're willing to buy those games at volume. So you still wind up losing money, right? In terms of risk, in terms of underperformance. But if you raise the price on AAA games so that you're making the money that you need to cover those production costs, then again, you forcibly move people down market. You now create an addressable market for which there will be a demand for your AA games. That's my belief in one of the ways that you address the problem.
We see this with other consumer products, with those higher luxury tiers, and that's why they exist. The luxury tiers and the tiers under that, right? That's why they exist. Because if you can't go up, where else do you go?
And what did Apple do? They created an iPad Pro, and then what did they address? Look, I can't afford an iPad Pro. I keep going back to the story. I watched the presentation, the keynote, right in 2024 when the M4 iPad Pro launched. I was on a 2021 iPad Pro planning on refreshing. I saw that price. I was like, bro, I can't afford an iPad Pro. But what did they do? Yeah, I mean, they've done it for a while, but they created the iPad Air, right? For which there would be a demand signal for people who now can't afford the iPad Pro. And when they bumped to the M4, they made a 13-inch iPad Air, right? Which is the one that I have. Why? Because there's now an addressable market of people willing to buy a 13-inch iPad Air because they can't afford the iPad Pro. So anyway, next story in the rundown, next topic in the rundown, GDC's annual State of the Game industry survey reveals 1/3 of AAA developers are working on live service games. This news story over on PC Gamer by Andy Chalk. We've expressed a certain creeping exhaustion with live service games more than once in these digital pages, and the catastrophic failure of Concord led to some predictions that the tide was finally turning against them. But maybe not, too. GDC's 2025 State of the Game Industry Report says 33% of AAA developers who responded to its annual survey are currently working on a live service game. Across all respondents, 16% said they were working on a live service game, indicative of the fact that they tend to be bigger budget affairs made by larger studios and publishers that can afford to develop and maintain them. Interestingly, only 13% of all respondents said they'd be interested in making a live service game for their next release, while 42% said they would not. 29% said they didn't know or that it wasn't applicable. One of the things that we've talked about on this show in the past is, again, debunking counter punditry, is a lot of the Inquirer tabloid opinions is that, mobile, right? The future is mobile. But again, this is one particular report, and it's corroborated by the ESA report that comes out, as well as other reports. When you look at the platform that most developers are developing for, they're developing for PC, right? So, yes, there's tons of shovelware out in the mobile game market, right? But the vast majority of your gaming developers continue to target PC. And I think for PC, then port, right, or multi-purpose, whatever, to console, right? Probably not a lot of development going on to port a game from PC to mobile. Some other interesting things, 35% of game developers are white male, not part of the LGBTQ community, which means that 65% are not white and male, which I don't believe there's 65% of the industry development community that is all DEI hires. I think that's because of who's available in the human capital market, which means it would make sense for you to play ball since you need people. 35% of game developers are game designers. 10% work in audio. I'm just kind of bouncing around here. 31% are in production. 20% are in visual arts. This is a partially philosophical problem I have, mostly with the takeaway and understanding people have. I get it, right? But lots of other people don't, which is why I sometimes take umbrage to the way, right? So my point is that when you talk about a developer and I start to talk about salary stratification, right? When I talk about salary prices, right, what I'm talking about are people who are hands-on keyboard, right? So when I say developer, I mean somebody who writes code, right? Understand when other people bring up topics like unionization and how much developers make and all that, like a lot of people will argue that developers don't get paid that much, but they're talking about a writer or somebody in QA test, right? Those people are not clocking six-figure salaries, nor do they have the ceiling potential, right, to make double six-figure salaries, right? People who are hands-on keyboard have the potential to eventually, it's a very small number of them, become these snipers and sharpshooters that get called in to be closers, right, for the last year of production of a project. They command incredibly high salaries because they're constantly in demand, and they're the people that the industry relies on to really get a thing finished, right? Your earning potential of somebody who works in audio, right, is not the same. And then when you talk about who's going to unionize, like, look, the people who have the potential to earn double six-figure salaries, they're not interested in unionizing, right? Because I'm not going to go into collective bargaining with a person whose maximum earning potential is like significantly less than mine. That doesn't make any sense for me. I want to send my kids to a college that I can afford on a double six-figure salary, not on your salary. And I don't want my salary negotiated in conjunction with yours because I look like weakest link in the chain, like lowest common denominator. Like I don't want to be part of that formula. 21% of developers work alone. Industry layoffs, obviously a big thing here. 60% of developers now working alone got laid off in the past year. I don't want to talk about AI because I don't talk about AI. It's more AI. I'm sorry. It's not that I don't talk about it. I do absolutely. Ramon Terrell, I don't think he's in the audience tonight, but Ramon Terrell and I talk a lot. I talk about AI very much from in terms of industry negotiations that are going on with like SAG-AFTRA and the strike and things like that. But like the topic of companies using AI for stuff. Here we go. Which platforms are being used for your current project? Every year we ask developers to share what platforms they've been making games for and which ones they plan on supporting in the future. Mobile games are the future. That's where it is. That's where all the industry needs to put it. PC, 80%. 80%. PlayStation 5 or 5 Pro, 38%. Xbox Series X and X, 34%. Down at number 4 at 29%. And then 28% are Android and iOS.
This is what again drives me crazy logic that people are having these conversations and it's really because unfortunately it's because they're trying to prove how or prove that direction that in this case Microsoft is going in gaming is the future. It's the right way. And then you see the GDC state of game industry survey and it's like well no, I mean in fact you're seeing, and this made me think about hardware. Hardware is incidental. Really? Because would you say 80%? What was the number again?
Yeah, 80% for PC.
I mean, so what does that tell you about hardware? I mean, like at the end, like you're always going to need hardware, right, to play software. Like that's a given.
Well, here's another thing. 35% of all game developers work in VR and AR development. Guess what market segment does not think of hardware as incidental? People aren't buying commodity level VR headsets who care about VR gaming.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, I do want to get to. So JD Gamer says, is it possible that PlayStation and Xbox have already considered the split market and decided to address them through both traditional full price sales and subscription services, creating two markets? JD, I'm going to say something that actually makes me emotional as I think about saying it. There are times when you come into this show and into this chat and you ask some of the most intellectually and eloquently well-formulated hypotheses, right? And stage them as questions. And I love it. And it conveys to me your depth of thought on this topic. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's maybe some nights you have a little tequila before you come in or what, right? But then there are other nights you come in here. And look, I don't want you to take this as an insult, right? There are other nights you come in here like in a rage, like I feel like yelling and shouting these Xbox community talking points and reissuing like marketing and PR statements. Like this JD Gamer is the JD Gamer that I have the most respect for, that I regard as a peer, and I just wish this would be the JD Gamer that I saw all the time. Me personally. But yeah, I think absolutely. Look, yes, I think the market is exactly what you said. I think Xbox has looked at the market and said, look, there's a consumer who prioritizes low cost of access, and in order to compensate, right, coming out of the last generation where we got outsold 2-1, I'm going to go after that consumer. I think they coiled up for that right in 2017, 18, 19, right, and they started paving the way for it by the introduction of Game Pass, right, by the backwards compatibility program, right, because they were going after a consumer who holds that in high regard and is, in some cases, more concerned about that than paying for new games. So absolutely, and I think Xbox has curried favor with those people, and I think they've positioned market products for those people, and I think they've incentivized that demand signal. Absolutely, I absolutely agree with you, and I think PlayStation has taken the high level luxury customer and makes and we've talked about this on the show, it makes a very Apple-esque play towards, right, encouraging people who want to buy things for ecosystems. And that, like, look, I've flipped, right, and gone into the Apple ecosystem, and I have HomePods. Great Scott, man. Like, if I ever talked about a product for which there's absolutely no good rational consumer argument for that being a product you need, right? My big HomePod is sitting here on my desk. Like, I can't even really use the thing because if I don't turn the reduce bass function on the thing booms so loud that my wife can hear it up on the third floor of the house, and I get yelled at. So I can only practically use this thing when nobody's in the house. It makes no sense. And this is a super expensive piece of equipment, right? But I'm in the Apple ecosystem, right? And that's what, look, people aren't buying PlayStation portals because it's like the most rational consumer product, right, to buy. But there are people who are in the PlayStation ecosystem and they like buying the PlayStation stuff and stuff that works all together, and they don't want to be bothered. Like a lot of arguments when like, well, you can just buy I forget what the things are, but a Razer Kishi and like use it with your phone and you can do that. But look, there are consumers who like simple plug and play. It always works. There's a ton of churn associated for a Luddite to figure out how to like make, PlayStation remote play or whatever work. People don't know how to set up their damn Wi-Fi networks. Like, look, people like stuff that just works when they put it together, or it has simplified configuration options, right? So, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think Xbox went after a consumer who is primarily motivated by price, and PlayStation is going after a customer that's primarily motivated by quality.
And by the way, in neither strategy is wrong, right or wrong. I mean, like right or wrong, right? There's no right. I mean, or wrong, I should say, because people are always trying to prove that one is wrong, the other one is right. They're just different strategies approaching, or different strategies that are going after different segments of the market. Again, that's no different than any other consumer product. It's no different than Lexus or BMW going after different segments of the market in the automobile industry than, let's say, Chevrolet, right? They're just two different. They're going after different, and that's perfectly fine. So I don't understand the argument. We don't argue BMW versus Chevy. We just don't do it.
So here's a big one. We asked developers to share the business models they're using for their current projects, as well as the discovery methods that are most effective in getting the word out. I stop here because some reason, it's absolutely unexplainable to me, the primary argument that makes the gaming community revolve is now an argument on business models. I do not understand how we have stopped arguing about games or even platforms or even operating systems, which are at some point, like there's a spectrum and a threshold within which those arguments even become silly. We are literally arguing about who has it right in how they're selling their games and going to market, which makes no sense to me. It is like the Harvard Business School having cheerleaders, right? Who literally show up in business class, right? To do dance routines. Like, I don't get it. At any rate, top 5 business models, 57% premium game, 32% free to play, 24% DLC updates, live service games, right? Your Destiny 2s. 22% paid in-game items, 18% paid in-game currency. So again, the top business model out of this survey that people are using as their go-to-market channel is premium games. Yeah, so it's amazing that the things that we say are dying or not working or the cause of the industry's failure as the things that are constantly, consistently, repeatably at the top of these lists.
Funny how that works, right? I mean, like, it's just, I mean, I really wish, and I hope some of the pundits read this GDC survey, because there's a lot of great information in terms of what developers are working on, what models that they're working in or models they're working on. The PC things, I gotta be. I think the PC thing surprised me a little bit that it was that high. Is that? Do you know if that's it? Do you recall if that's an increase from the year before? In the survey,
I mean, maybe by a few percentage points, but I mean, it's consistent with what's been reported by multiple industry surveys. But the reason is because it makes things easy, right? If you get the thing on PC, then porting it, right, even if you're doing it concurrently to a console, because consoles are built on x86 architecture. There's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of point, right? And the other reason is because often when people get their start, right, because remember, a lot of the incubation, right, is high schoolers, college kids, people coming out of boot camp, right? And most of those people have to have a PC anyway. They're not paying to get an SDK. They're not paying, right, to get licensed. They're not going through all the certification process. And when you talk about publishing your game, those hoops are a lot easier. Like, look, I am a PMBOK, CBOK, INCOSE, dyed-in-the-wool, heavy process person. I totally believe in Xbox's regimented way and approach for its certification process. That's the world that I kind of live in and the things that I love, and I would absolutely be a proponent of it. How does that play in the gaming market and on the industry? There's lots of people who think that that's a pain in the ass, right? And so they don't like going through it. So, in contrast, right, again, and I don't agree with it, and there's lots of aspects I hate, publishing your game on Steam is like lick spigot easy. Like, there's no governance, right? There's nobody looking over your shoulder. You can publish whatever the hell you want. And so I think that's what drives a lot of people to do PC.
What was the other part about? Was there another part about AAA games?
The primary business the primary business model that people are using as their go-to-market throughway is premium games, which is putting their game up for sale, right, on a primary storefront, right, and doing their sell through that way versus like free to play, taking a Game Pass deal, right, doing all these other ways of going to market.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, last talking topic I want to round out this news story over on Push Square. A damning PlayStation Studios rumor debunked after live service PS5 game cancellation. This news story by Robert Ramsey. Earlier today, a follow-up story to last week's PlayStation Studios cancellation started doing the rounds online, claiming that the developers of these canceled projects, Bluepoint Games and Ben Studio, only heard the news at the same time as everyone else. If true, the whispers painted a rather damning picture of PlayStation management, but apparently both teams did know about the cancellations ahead of the public announcement. That's according to the ever-reliable Jason Schreier, who broke the original news. I've seen the story getting a lot of traction on Reddit today, but it's not true. He wrote on Blue Sky, people across the organization were informed before my article went out last week. Now, if you know anything about software development and how it happens in a corporation, and you understand how people charge time and how costs are accumulated, in order for you to be working on a project, you have to have a charge number that your labor hours go to accumulate costs against
Charge code.
that P&L center. Right. If a team is working on a game, then the only way for me to know how much that game is costing me is for people to apply their labor charges to that cost account. And so if you're going to cancel a game for which the purposes is to stop accumulating charges against a P&L cost center, the only way for that to happen is for you to tell people to stop charging that charge number. And the way for you to do that is to tell them that the game is canceled. How do you arrive at this? Great Scott, man. How do you arrive at the conclusion that if the devs didn't know that the game was canceled, they would still be charging time, you would still be accumulating costs, you would thereby defeat the entire purpose of canceling the game? Holy cow, man. Like, I don't get it. Reddit, it's off the chain. Oh my gosh, man.
And you know, this goes back to a complaint of mine that we have so much information at our fingertips. All you have to do is just do a Google search. What happens when a you know, in terms with software development, when a software development project is canceled, or any project for that matter? Because I deal with projects on a daily basis, and one of the things we ask, what's the charge code for this product or this project? Because we actually can't onboard someone unless we have a charge code already. I cannot open a requisition unless I have a charge code. I can't onboard that contractor unless they have a charge code to charge their timesheet against. Can't do it.
Right. So this goes into the larger topic of, does PlayStation have a mismanagement problem? There's lots of, again, punditry around, well, but because they canceled games, that means there's mismanagement. Because Concord failed, that means there's mismanagement. And the hypothesis I would propose is, in a large scale commercial business venture, there are always going to be some edges of things that don't go well, right? You're trying to create a high performance organization. You're going to have some things that go well and some things that don't. You're going to have failures, right?
Hey, even Tom Brady lost Super Bowls.
Right. So the question becomes, again, these things are on a graduated scale, right? Our pushback is the people who talk in absolutes. Is the failure of an order of magnitude of Sega, to the extent that it drives them to exit the hardware industry? Is it along? I constantly reference these great case studies, right, in business, that business students at graduate schools should have been exposed to. And I think many have. We have BlackBerry, we have Wang, we have Xerox, we have IBM, we have Microsoft. Some of these were abject failures. We have HP. Some of these were abject failures. Some of these were turnarounds. The business IBM is today is not the business that they were in the 70s, before Microsoft took over the world with Windows. IBM was in that space. Windows was actually partially made in a partnership with IBM to support the IBM business. But then when IBM started making choices that weren't necessarily the best for Microsoft, Microsoft made Windows so that they were survivable on their own without being tied at the hip to IBM. As a result, over time, IBM needed to do a pivot. If you've ever read The Innovator's Dilemma and the Wisdom of Teams, you would note that one of the biggest challenges in large-scale businesses is that they are incredibly slow to pivot, incredibly difficult to make pivot. Seagate did not want to get into making SSDs, because what did I say was the first rule of business? Keep the customers that you have. Seagate was highly afraid that by making SSDs, they would piss off their traditional customers, right, and lose them, because their traditional customers would think that, oh, well, our vendor is hyper focused on like chasing this newfangled thing and isn't as focused on providing us enterprise class spinning SSDs. Other numerous problems with innovation. So one of the ways Seagate went about it is they took people who were going to go make SSDs, they actually broke them off into their own subsidiary, right, and business venture, and maintained loose corporate funding ties, financial ties to them, but essentially made them their own business, right? So does PlayStation have a mismanagement problem? I can't look at every business that we look at in an annual basis has some failure, something that they have to strangle, something that they have to cancel, moving people around, getting out of business, constantly getting out of businesses, getting into new adjacencies. You can't, in my mind, you can't apply a mismanagement label, because a mismanagement should mean a thing. When I say mismanagement, I talk about something failing. BlackBerry was mismanaged, right? To the point where it didn't pivot in time, it didn't strike out on new product lanes in time, it ignored the iPhone, it didn't consider it a big threat, to the point where almost the entirety of their business was eroded. Now they've eventually pivot, and they're still a going concern, right? Because the operating system for RIM was incredibly valuable, because it's one of the ones that has the strongest DoD security certifications, right? And people still value their back-end server services. And so RIM found a way to survive and not entirely go out of business. Wang, however, did not, right? My point is that if I'm going to say a company has a mismanagement problem, I'm going to say Wang had a mismanagement problem, right? RIM had a mismanagement problem, right? But PlayStation is still the market leader. It still has the greatest market share. So how am I going to say that they have a mismanagement problem? Xbox has a problem. I mean, both of these companies have some level of problem, right? The question is, how are they contending with it? Are those problems the same? Xbox has an entirely different mismanagement problem, I think, than PlayStation does, right? But the other problem is that the application of this label is, again, attempted to be labeled as an absolute, right? PlayStation has a mismanagement problem, thereby they are failing. Well, how can you say that the company with the largest market share is failing, right? Market share by revenue, right? When Xbox, in order to achieve parity with revenue, even though they had the same, even greater number of studios before they bought Activision, didn't achieve parity with PlayStation until the Activision purchase went through. So, I mean, again, I think there are things that have not been optimized, and I think there are things that you can look back at past generations and say that, this was better, that was better. But again, what I have to turn to is, okay, but I'm looking at the competitor that has the largest market share, has the largest user install base, right, gains the most revenue. I don't know how to refer to that as a mismanagement problem. I don't know, Brett, your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I mean, they wouldn't be in the position they were in if there was a mismanagement problem. And the examples you give are actually great examples. Wang, I remember Wang, BlackBerry, at one point Apple, before Steve Jobs came back. I mean,
not even after Steve Jobs came back, until they were until they were literally a weekend away from not being able to make payroll, and then they were rescued by Bill Gates. And that's
right. Yes. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. So, I mean, they are examples of companies that are actually mismanaged, and the cancellation of 2 live service games and the failure of one, to me, doesn't lead me to believe that there's these great mismanagement issues, as this one particular pundit, I won't name his name, but he tends to really say some off the wall things that really don't hold any weight. And I think, unfortunately, it's said to create a false narrative, fan fiction, as you like to call it, game logic. But yeah, I mean, does shit happen? Absolutely. Do things fall through the crack? Absolutely. In software development, do projects get canceled? Absolutely. Even outside of software development, we're going through this right now. Software integration. We didn't cancel a project, but we delayed it because the 2 platforms aren't communicating correctly. So we need to put that on the shelf. Does that mean there's a mismanagement problem? No. Actually, it's the opposite. Management stepped in and said, wait a minute, like this isn't working the way we want it to work. Therefore, we're going to delay the launch of this particular program. That to me is signs of an organization, when you see those things, of an organization that doesn't have a mismanagement problem. When they're stepping in and they're, I know we talked about this earlier in the week, they're looking to mitigate risk, potential loss of revenue or money, resources, time. Those things are valuable to organizations. And if they feel like, if leadership feels like, hey, I mean, it's one thing to cancel 2 games because you feel like, hey, these games aren't, and this is the funny thing about the gaming community. It's one thing to cancel 2 games because you feel like these games are not going to hit. It's a waste of our time and resources. We can divert these resources into something we feel is going to be a better ROI for us than to release something that's in bad shape, that's not going to sell well, could potentially even damage your reputation or your brand. You do that, and that's the thing that gamers always complain about. Oh, well, why did they release it? It's like damned if you did, if you don't, with some people in the gaming community.
Well, some demographics, right? The unfortunate impact on the industry is you have, and I'm not going to try and quantify how large of a force this is, but you do have some consumers who are, right, because we see the responses. Well, the game was in Game Pass, so I didn't spend any money on it, so I'm fine to let them continue working on Redfall. I had a hell of a good time with it. I was enjoying the game. You get Matt Booty saying, hey, Redfall is a problem, but we're seeing good engagement numbers on it in Game Pass. So it's a miss, but how much of a miss is it? That's literally his quote. So, again, varying outcomes for varying consumers. There's no one right answer. But as you mentioned, right, the fact that 2 games got canceled before expenditures could continue to accumulate against them, when they were potentially pointing in a bad direction and they had the potential to not meet ROI objectives, right? That's not indicative of a mismanagement problem. That's actually indicative that there's governance, that there are periodic check-ins, right? Because the news story is that this decision was made after a review. Again, I'm not going to go through all the past history of all the indicators, right, that we've have of the PlayStation governance system, but there are clear indicators that say periodically during the run of a project, you have to get in front of a board and show where your game is, report on your budgetary outlook, look at the glide slope of your spend versus how much you've accomplished, whether or not you're coming down on the expected release date, right? And when all those things don't add up, right, then that board makes a decision for you to either continue forward or for your game to be canceled, right? And probably multiple variations in between. This is a normal thing that happens in a corporation. I have existed under this my entire career. I've had to come up and do monthly program management reviews. I've had to come up and do monthly engineering reviews, right? And when those things are internally funded and they're R&D, the decision gets made, right, to continue on with the effort, sometimes just to strangle the budget, right, and to rescope. I do this on a daily basis, right, with one of my AI ML teams right now, just constantly, because we're highly in prototyping and highly in R&D. I'm constantly rescoping, right, and telling developers, like, get back inside this box, right, because you've got to deliver a thing within a certain time. I know that you want to make it more right, but you don't have unlimited time, so I want you to make a thing that's just enough right, to achieve the strategic objective we have. Right. So, I mean, again, these things happen all the time. They're a normal part of corporate governance, right? They shouldn't be looked at as anomalies or something weird that happened or mismanagement, right? Mismanagement, in my opinion, is the opinion from a person who doesn't actually understand what management looks like.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that logic. And I think that's part of the problem. They don't understand what mismanagement looks like. Because again, to your point, and that's been my experience too, with just being around certain projects and programs that we're staffing up for, that when things aren't meeting a certain threshold of quality, or certain things aren't happening, those periodic check-ins lead to decisions happening. And sometimes those decisions are, hey, we're going to cut bait because we need to, because this just doesn't make sense for us to continue the path we're going down, or to your point, we rescope and we go back to the drawing board. Those things happen daily. And I would even add, I would be concerned if, again, I think it's probably safe to assume here, Logic, that those games weren't in good state because they got canceled. But if you're coming off the lessons of Concord, you would imagine there's probably even more of a magnifying glass on some of these live service games.
Well, this is one of the things that we mentioned last week, right? The other possibility in the realm of governance, right, where you have multiple causalities, right, and we keep talking about these things are complex and there's nuance. It could have been to absolute zero fault of that team. Blue Point, as far as we know, is a great studio. It's why they were acquired, right? Bend, despite the problems that it's had, right, as far as we think of them, is still a PlayStation studio, right? Which in my mind, from a quality perspective, just means like a certain bar that's kind of raised above the industry average. Yes, they're a support studio, but they're a support studio that's helped like get some of the biggest marquee games in the PlayStation 4 portfolio across the line, and they're still, granted, completely different team, but was the team, originally way back in the day responsible for Siphon Filter. So, I mean, I don't think Bend Studio is a nothing studio, right? But it could have simply been, hey, you're up for review. Let's look and see what you have. We were coming off the lesson of Concord. We think that there's a different dynamic going on in the industry. Maybe we think live service games are a good thing, but maybe there's some nit with the market uptake in the association with our brand that we're reevaluating whether or not that's a good strategic direction. And for that reason, right, we're looking at what you have. For that reason, we're going to cancel your game. It also could very well be, depending on what you have, we're making a decision about whether or not we're going to pivot your game right back to single player. And maybe it's a matter of, is there significant enough code reuse available? Is there a significant enough asset reuse? What would be the impact, right? What's the feasibility of you turning this back into a more traditional single-player game? The answer to that could have been, that would be a complete rewrite. We would have to start completely over. There's just no way, right? That could have been the answer. Or the answer could have been, yes, we can do it, but we're probably going to need 1.5 times the budget that we have. Maybe that's outside the governance envelope. Right? Tons of different reasons that could have led to the game's cancellation. So,
yeah. No, I agree, Logic. It's a great point.
So just GD Gamers kind of coming in here. I believe that Pete Hines was trusted, be it right or wrong, to ensure that ZeniMax games were meeting their targets, and he assured his Microsoft bosses they were, so they released them. I mean, that's a possibility. I mean, he could have been delegated that authority to be the person who made that internal call. It's an interesting case study. If I abstract myself to the 10,000 foot level, I don't know that as on the consumer side and from the performance evaluation of the Xbox business unit side, I don't know that I care about that granularity. At the end of the day, that lies at the foot of Xbox. In my mind, it lies at the foot of Matt Booty. I think Xbox agrees with me because that's the reason Matt Booty has Bethesda right under his purview now, right? To have that visibility and to be the person who's in that chain of command, that it's no longer operating as an independent unit from a publishing perspective. So, I mean, Pete Hines, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? Was he responsible for, the Redfall? I mean, I had this argument with a person who, my impression is that they're much younger, generationally separated, has never had P&L responsibility, much less, command of, the lives of men and women. I told her, I mean, at the end of the day, the captain, right, the captain goes down with the ship, and the captain of the ship is Phil Spencer, right, in his GLT. It's not delegated down to Pete Hines. Again, a classic lesson in business, right, and I think one that's being lost in the teaching of values of leadership, right, to younger generations is that you can delegate responsibility, you can never delegate accountability. So that's
a great point. That's a great point. Logic. Yeah.
Yeah. The fault and the reason for the blame of the Redfall debacle cannot be delegated to Pete Hines. Yeah, the responsibility can be, but not the accountability.
Yeah, that's a great point, man.
Okay, very quickly, significant releases coming out next week, the week of 27th January 2025. You have Virtua Fighter 5 Revo on PC, which, as far as I can tell, I didn't have time to dig the full details up, but as far as I can tell, is some type of remake, remaster of Virtua Fighter 5. You have Sniper Elite Resistance coming out on PC, PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4. In 2024, there are people still releasing games on PlayStation 4. Xbox Series X and Xbox One comes out on January 30th. And Wizardry, The Five Ordeals, comes out for the Nintendo Switch January 30th. I mentioned Wizardry because if you're an old head and are familiar with the old Wizardry franchise, right, there have been several games that have been released in kind of a reimagining of that series. So it is historically and nostalgically significant. So if you're the type of person who enjoyed that type of RPG, you should check that out. BRAP, anything else you want to go over tonight? It's late. We've gone long.
I mean, no, I don't have anything else. I didn't realize it was midnight.
We've been having a good conversation. So
yeah, it was a great conversation. I tell you what, the kind of a takeaway for me this conversation tonight was just the artistic value in gaming, or that we just don't celebrate enough. That's my biggest takeaway from tonight. It really is. I mean, outside of everything else we talked about, because, and it was. I think it was. It was something that was really like we were talking about Mass Effect, the Mass Effect trilogy, and then we're talking about oh my gosh, I forgot the name of the game. What is it? Expedition 33?
Yeah, Expedition 33, Claire Obscura.
Yeah, we're talking about that. It's just like there, and then the new Don't Not game. Gaming's wonderful. It's a wonderful medium, and it pains me that we have the kind of conversations we have over what, in my opinion, is just a great form of art, and the differences in the types of games that we're getting. Those things should be talked about and celebrated more. And that to me was really my takeaway this evening.
Yeah, I mean, so my feeling on the business side, and again, I don't really know whether content creators have gone down this path. Look, I mean, it's always been pertinent to talk about the business of gaming, right? To gain greater understanding, greater insight. The sensibility in literally arguing and clout chasing and doing one-upsmanship about business models, I don't understand that at all. It's really silly. I mean, why would you take the side of a business model? Like, I mean, we've said this multiple times, right? I think there are some people who get it, and there are some people who just refuse to believe it. If anything, if nothing has been proven to you over the last year, what should have been proven to you is that corporations don't care about you.
Mm-mm.
Like, they don't care about your empathy. They don't care whether you like them, right? What they care about is, are they getting their money from you? And so talking about business and business practices and commerciality and like whether things are going to go, I think that's fine, right? Taking sides and arguing business models and yelling, shouting. Like, again, we've had people who've come up here in this chat yelling and screaming literally yelling and screaming at us. Addict, Risk It, right? Because Addict was offended that what I was discussing about dynamics for unionization based on actual employment data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? Risk It mad because I felt a certain way about the acquisition that he didn't agree with, and his assertion basis was that because he works in contracting or some adjacent domain, that therefore he knows that. Like, I don't get it. This is a little bit of what I felt about like Jaffe and some of the comments like last week too. Like I get it. Like, there are people who don't agree with Jaffe's opinions on games. But me having a difference of opinion on games or the industry with somebody is not a reason for me to break the bounds of having a Socratic conversation about it. And getting emotional and casting aspersions on a person's character and declaring that their motivations for their opinion are somehow based on a grift. Like, I don't know. It's weird. This whole YouTube community is weird. Strange as bonkers. I've been exposed to it. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't either. It's strange. It really is. And I think unfortunately the algorithm rewards the behavior. Unfortunately, so
yeah, and I'll just double down. It doesn't need to be that way. Like I'm not gonna like I'm not gonna go back badmouth you behind your back or cast aspersions on you because you have a difference in gaming opinion than I do. Like it's just not necessary. Like I've very rarely, outside of politics, I've very rarely seen or been exposed to this whole thing of, oh, you have a difference in gaming opinion than I do. I'm going to call you a name, insult you, cast aspersions on you, your dog, your ancestors, your progeny, and then and declare you a bad person. What? I will also say, as I've mentioned on Twitter, right, most of this happening by men over the age of 40 who should have better things to do and a better anchor to how they consider their own, evaluate their own life worth and value. Yeah, but that's just me. BRAP, like I said, anything else you want to talk
about? No, I don't have anything else.
All right, well, thanks a lot. Join us next week when we will be live again, same bat time, same bat channel. Once again, my name has been Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Basement Radio Arcade podcast. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe out there, play the games that you like, come here to talk to us about the games that you love. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here.